One morning in June in Occitania, France, Amandine Estrabaud, a high school assistant from the small town of Roquecourbe, left for work. That evening, neighbors didn't see her near her home. The next day, her phone stopped working, and her front door was unlocked. Something is fishy. From a young age, Amandine was involved in community events, including the local festival committee. She had a very close and friendly relationship with her mother. She was also close to her brother, Remy. People in Roquecourbe affectionately called Amandine and Remy the village children. After breaking up with her partner, Amandine moved back to her hometown. She was independent and actively involved in life. Even though she had previously lived with her partner near the Castres train station, Amandine hoped to study speech-language pathology and intended to buy a car. There was no indication that she had disappeared voluntarily or was experiencing a serious emotional breakdown. On Tuesday, June 18, 2013, Amandine went to work at the lycée. It was a typical day. She spent the morning helping staff, and everything seemed fine. Around 1:10 p.m., she finished her work and left. Usually, someone drove her home because she didn't have a car. However, that day, no one could give her a ride. Having no other option, she started walking home alone. The walk was approximately 8 miles long and would take her nearly 3 hours to complete. Around 2:15 p.m., Amandine was reportedly seen in the salvage area near a bus stop just a few miles from her home. This was the last confirmed public sighting of her. What happened afterward is still unclear, but investigators have pieced together a possible sequence of events based on second-hand accounts. Although there was no surveillance footage or other hard evidence, a neighbor named Karine helped piece together a key part of the timeline. Karine lived nearby and had a clear view of Amandine's front door from her home. Around 4:00 p.m., she noticed a white Renault traffic van parked outside, a vehicle she'd never seen in the neighborhood before. It didn't belong to any locals and stood out as unfamiliar. Amandine got out of the van first. She appeared calm, was wearing normal clothes, and didn't seem upset. Karine saw her holding a bag on her lap and looking for her keys. Amandine unlocked the door and went inside. Soon after, a man got out of the van. Karine couldn't see his face clearly because she only saw him from behind, and he was far away. However, she remembered he was about 170 centimeters tall and had a sturdy build. He was wearing gray work pants with large pockets and orange reflective stripes, like those worn by construction, road, or utility workers. Although Karine couldn't see his face, his behavior didn't seem suspicious. He walked calmly and wasn't aggressive. Karine said there was no argument or tension between him and Amandine. They seemed to interact in a normal. She didn't hear any yelling or signs of a fight. Investigators recorded Karine's statement, and it became important to the case. On June 19, Amandine's mother, Monique, started to worry. They usually met up, and had planned to do so the day before. They were very close and always kept in contact. Monique called several times throughout the day and evening, but Amandine didn't answer. Amandine always returned calls quickly if she missed them, but this time Monique heard nothing. Monique initially wasn't worried, assuming Amandine was occupied. However, when she still hadn't received any contact by the following morning, Monique decided to drive to Amandine's home. When she arrived, she found the front door unlocked. This immediately alarmed her. Amandine was always cautious, especially living in a secluded area. Inside, everything looked as if Amandine had just stepped out for a moment. A jacket hung neatly on a chair. Her everyday bag was in its usual place. Her phone was left out and unattended. The home was quiet. Monique called out, but no one responded. There were no signs of urgent errands or a quick departure. A visual inspection of the home's interior revealed no signs of disorder. Everything was in its place, no forced entry, no displaced furniture, no items thrown around. Monique felt strongly that something was wrong. Amandine was usually very organized and predictable. Especially recently, she always kept her phone with her, told someone where she was going, and locked her door. Because Amandine wasn't acting like herself, Monique decided to call the police. She contacted the local police station in Roca Courbe. Officers came to the house and looked around. They saw the same things Monique did. There was no sign of a fight. The door hadn't been forced open, and it didn't look like anyone had broken in. It seemed like Amandine had left on her own without being forced. However, after the officers went outside, they found something disturbing. Behind the house, accessible through a sliding glass door, was a garden. While the yard was overgrown, a specific patch of grass caught their attention. It was a rectangular area, about 5 by 5 feet, where the grass was noticeably flattened. The ground was even, and the plants were pressed down, suggesting something or someone had been there for a long time or had exerted force on the area. This suggests that a struggle may have taken place. Near this location, police found some of Amandine's belongings, including a pair of light shoes, identified by Monique as the ones Amandine wore the previous day, and 2 earrings. The earrings were damaged at the clasps, suggesting they may have been pulled off forcefully, perhaps during a struggle. This was the first physical evidence suggesting that something unusual happened to Amandine. Even though the search that day didn't turn up anything new, the investigators had enough information to consider Amandine's case a suspicious disappearance. They started an official investigation, interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities. The case quickly moved into its active phase. The first step was to review any available surveillance footage. Though cameras were few and far between in the area, authorities also canvassed potential routes Amandine could have taken on the 18th of June, prioritizing anyone who might have seen her that day. The speedy efforts, no new sightings surfaced beyond what had already been documented. Soon, missing person bulletins were issued. Amandine was described as approximately 165 meters tall with long dark hair. On the day she vanished, she was wearing a brown skirt that fell above the knee, a light tan jacket, and a dark blouse. Flyers were posted around the region at bus stops, on bulletin boards, and in local shops. Notices also ran in regional newspapers and on local radio stations. They started an official investigation, interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities. At the same time, many people were searching the area between Cantigolan and Salvage, near Amandine's house. Volunteers and officials looked carefully through forests, fields, and along the Agout River. Even though they searched a large area, they didn't find Amandine or anything that belonged to her. Each passing day made it less likely that Amandine had left on her own. Her bank account remained untouched, and there were no phone calls or messages to suggest a voluntary disappearance. Everything pointed to something far more troubling, most likely a crime. In the initial weeks of the investigation, the primary theory quickly became that she was the victim of a violent crime committed by someone else. The investigation then focused a company in Roca Courbe because they owned a utility van matching the description of one seen near Amandine's residence. Furthermore, the uniforms their employees wore were similar to what the man seen entering Amandine's house was wearing. Garrick Jahano, 25, mason at this company, was originally from the area and knew many people, including Amandine's brother, Ray. Before working at the construction firm, Garrick cut granite. His name came up in the case in April 2014 when his mother, Irma, contacted the authorities. She was worried about her son's behavior. Irma said Garrick kept making strange statements, such as, "I'm not a criminal," and, if they find blood in the van, it's from fish. He mentioned strange smells he encountered while fishing or mushroom hunting and claimed he could smell death. He had become increasingly paranoid, believing people were watching and hunting him. He once said he saw someone in the woods with a shovel, but didn't report it. It was uncertain if these were intrusive thoughts, delusions, or signs of emotional distress. Following his mother's statement, Garrick was questioned for the first time. He was detained for 48 hours in June 2014, but denied any involvement in Amandine's disappearance. Company records initially supported his alibi, showing he was assigned to a construction site in Castres on the 18th of June. His supervisor and colleagues confirmed his presence. However, further investigation revealed inconsistencies. A supervisor admitted that after a concrete delivery to a construction site near Rokerib, a 6-minute drive from Amandin's home, he had approximately 90 minutes unaccounted for. None of Garrick's colleagues could confirm his location during that time. It was possible he used the company van to travel near Amandin's residence. Therefore, his whereabouts during a crucial period remained unknown. The neighbor who last saw Amandine before she disappeared was asked if she recognized Garrick. She couldn't say for sure if he was the man she saw. In Rokerib, she knew many people by sight, including Garrick. She did mention that Garrick's usual work pants looked like the ones the man was wearing that day. However, because she only saw the man from behind and through her window, she couldn't formally identify him. Although there wasn't definitive proof, the growing amount of information pointed to Garrick as the main suspect. Even without direct evidence connecting him to Amandine Estrabad's disappearance, he was the first and only person investigators seriously considered. After questioning him, Garrick was released because there wasn't enough legal justification to hold him. Investigators were also trying to figure out why Garrick was in Amandine's home. Initially, they found no clear link between them. However, some people who knew Garrick said he was interested in Amandine. A friend remembered Garrick calling her attractive and openly showing his feelings. Also, Amandine had a small problem at home, a possible water leak in a room, perhaps while running into him on the street or near her home, and he offered to help, mentioning his construction experience. This could explain why he was in her home without forcing his way in. Her relaxed behavior that day suggests she knew him at least a little. All of these elements led to the first working theory in the case: Garrick might have used the situation as an opportunity to get closer to her. But something went very wrong. The motive, actions, and consequences were still unclear, but a coherent narrative was starting to form. In June 2016, 2 months after Garrick was arrested for abduction and unlawful confinement, the investigation changed course significantly. Weeks after his initial arrest, he was also charged with premeditated murder. This new charge was based on testimonies from several inmates who had been in the same cell block as Garrick while he was awaiting trial. These inmates claimed that Garrick had spoken openly about his role in Amandine's disappearance. One inmate stated that Garrick described abuse-aggressive actions followed by Amandine's death. This inmate provided details that had not been released to the public, suggesting Garrick had direct knowledge of the events. Garrick allegedly confessed to disposing of Amandine's body and hiding her belongings. One inmate reported this information to investigators in a recorded interview. These inmate testimonies were considered credible, especially since no other confessions had been made in the case at that point. Then, Garrick provided 2 hand-drawn maps. The first map showed where he claimed to have buried a body and covered it with lime. The second map showed the coordinates where he said Amandine's jewelry was hidden. Both maps had Amandine's name on them. These maps led to a large search operation in the area Garrick indicated. For several weeks, search teams, including archaeologists from Institut National de Recherches Archéologiques Préventives, searched the difficult, wooded terrain near Ambres. The area was mountainous with steep ravines, streams, and thick vegetation. They used ground-penetrating radar and carefully examined caves and natural pits. However, despite the detailed maps and the extensive search, they found neither a body nor Amandine's jewelry. Later, Garrick changed his account. He claimed the drawings had nothing to do with Amandine's disappearance. Instead, he said they showed his favorite spots for fishing and mushroom picking. He suggested he wrote Amandine's name on them either to keep people away from his spots or to gain respect from other inmates. His lawyers argued that he was deliberately trying to seem intimidating to avoid trouble in prison. Although Garrick later contradicted his initial statements, those statements still carried legal significance. Investigators emphasized that Garrick revealed details that only someone directly involved would likely know. This insider knowledge strongly suggested his involvement, even though he hadn't confessed. The case against him relied not on one specific piece of evidence, but on a combination of factors, circumstantial details that aligned his actions, his words, and information that was unlikely to be known by someone not involved. Over 7 years after Amandine Estrabad vanished, the trial of Garrick Jahano began on October 8, 2020. In the Albi Court of Assizes, Garrick Jahano was charged with kidnapping, illegal imprisonment, and murder. The case was unusual because there was no body, confession, DNA, blood, or any other direct physical evidence. Despite the lack of direct proof, the prosecution thought the indirect evidence was compelling enough to justify presenting the case to a jury. Garrick's alibi had contradictions, and his past statements had inconsistencies, which were part of the evidence presented in the trial. Digital records also raised suspicion. His gaming console, which he used every day, was not turned on the night in question. He claimed he just didn't play, but he had previously told investigators that he spent the evening playing PlayStation. This contradiction was important to the prosecution. Garrick's behavior in court was met with varying reactions. Journalists observed that he seemed uninterested in the trial, refused to look at pictures of Amandine, and didn't react to her mother's emotional statements. When questioned about his feelings while viewing Amandine's picture, Garrick stated that he felt nothing. This seeming lack of emotion strengthened the impression that he was emotionally distant and detached. Several witnesses characterized him as a withdrawn individual who became aggressive when intoxicated, and these observations were officially documented in the court records. Garrick denied all charges. His lawyers argued that the prosecution lacked direct evidence, and that the case relied on speculation. They claimed the prosecution's case was built on guesses, unreliable inmate statements, and indirect evidence. The prosecution responded that the inconsistencies in Garrick's story, the absence of any other reasonable explanation, and Garrick's actions strongly suggested he was involved in a violent event. On October 14, 2020, Garrick Jahano was found guilty by a jury of abducting Amandine Estrabad, unlawfully detaining her, and causing her death. He received a 30-year prison sentence, which he will serve in a high-security prison. The court stated that the evidence presented, even without Amandine's body being found, was compelling and consistent enough to convict him. This case was highly publicized and is one of the few times in French legal history that someone has been convicted of homicide when the victim's body was never recovered. After being initially found guilty, Garrick appealed the decision. A second trial started on November 15, 2021. At the Toulouse Appellate Court in the Haute-Garonne department, the charges against Garrick remain. The defense argued that he was convicted despite a lack of evidence. One lawyer likened the case to other unsolved disappearances in the area, such as Delphine Jubilars, who disappeared without a trace in December 2020. Like Amandine's case, Jubilar's body was never found. The prosecution, however, restated its arguments. The focus remained on Garrick's questionable alibi, his unaccounted-for movements during the key time window, his inconsistent statements, and his suspicious behavior following Amandine's disappearance. New details also emerged regarding his concerning online activity, highlighting a pattern of obsessive and troubling internet behavior, including viewing content with deviant themes. Prosecutors laid out a likely scenario. Garrick offered Amandine a ride, possibly under the pretext of helping inspect her home after she had mentioned plumbing issues. Once inside, an incident occurred, possibly a confrontation following unwanted advances, which escalated and ended fatally. Defense lawyers denied this version, pointing out that no one saw him leaving the house, and there was no physical evidence of aggression. On the 19th of November, 2021, the appellate court upheld the original verdict. Garrick Jahano was again found guilty. But contrary to the Estrabad family's hopes, the 2021 ruling wasn't the final chapter. In 2022, the Court of Cassation overturned the decision due to a procedural error. One required legal phrase was missing from the court's written justification. Though the omission was technical, it triggered a mandatory retrial. The third trial occurred in January 2024 in Montalban, Tarn-et-Garonne. The prosecution repeated their previous arguments. Claiming the amount of circumstantial evidence proved guilt, they again used Garrick's statements from prison, his drawings, and previous inconsistencies in his behavior as evidence. The defense tried to prove Garrick was not at the crime scene and had no connection to the crime was an Eversound. Garrick, who had turned 35 by the time of the hearings, once again denied all charges. In a surprising twist, his mother changed her story, claiming she never said the things attributed to her in the official records. This sudden reversal caused a strong reaction from both the court and the prosecution, as her original statements had played a key role in launching the investigation. Despite efforts by the defense to dismantle the central elements of the case, they were unsuccessful. On the 30th of January, 2024, Garrick Jahano was found guilty for the third time on charges of abduction, unlawful detention, and committing a fatal act against Amandine. He was once again sentenced to 30 years in prison. Later, the Court of Cassation rejected his final appeal, confirming the verdict as legally binding. The disappearance of Amandine Estrabad led to a highly unusual and controversial trial in France, resulting in 3 guilty verdicts, despite the absence of a body, a confession, and direct physical evidence. This case deeply divided the public. Some believed the verdicts were just and essential, while others felt they were based on too little certainty. Legal experts pointed out that the convictions were based on the bundle of clues principle, a legal concept where a collection of individually weak pieces of evidence can, when combined, create a strong case for guilt. While legal in France, this approach naturally raises the question: at what point does reasonable doubt become too significant to ignore? Robert Bob Samuels grew up in a small town in California, surrounded by orange groves and safe streets where children played freely. From a young age, he showed a passion for photography, and his talent convinced his friends that he would create something special. Determined to pursue his dream, he studied hard and later became a camera assistant, working on major film projects. Movie stars admired him for his hard-working nature and friendly personality. Despite the glamour of the job, his work came with challenges: long hours, erratic schedules, and constant traveling. Yet, he excelled at his craft. While his career flourished, Robert's personal life suffered. His busy work schedule took up most of his time, making it difficult for him to maintain relationships. Most women were not willing to put up with his frequent absences. Although Robert longed to settle down and start a family, he was close to giving up on finding the right partner, until he reconnected with Mary Ellen Gurnick. Mary used to be the most outstanding girl in high school, the prom queen, the star of the plays, and the person every man admired. For Robert, she was like a dream out of reach. Just looking at her made him speechless, but that feeling only stopped at admiring her beauty. After high school, Mary briefly pursued fame, appearing in a few commercials, but her dreams of stardom never materialized. She married young, divorced soon after, and returned to her hometown years later as a single mother to her daughter, Nicole. When Mary and Robert met again, he was now part of the Hollywood scene, which seemed to make her more interested in him. The two appeared happy together, full of excitement and energy, and in 1980, they tied the knot in a wedding that felt like a moment straight out of a movie. Mary and Nicole moved into Robert's home, and he adopted Nicole, striving to be a loving and dedicated husband and father. Mary finally found her way into Hollywood through her marriage to Robert. However, the glamorous life she had envisioned didn't materialize. Instead, they lived in a modest house in the San Fernando Valley. While Robert worked long hours, Mary stayed home to handle the housework, cooking, and other chores, far from the glitzy lifestyle she had hoped for. Over time, the routine took its toll. Mary began to feel bored and unfulfilled, far removed from the spotlight she had once dreamed of. She started dressing provocatively, attending parties, and associating with questionable people. Robert soon discovered that she was unfaithful. Although their relationship became strained and they separated several times, Mary always found a way to win Robert back. Despite his friend's advice to reconsider the marriage, Robert remained committed and determined to make it work. Believing Mary's unhappiness stemmed from boredom, Robert tried to help by buying her a small sandwich shop and making her its manager, hoping to keep her occupied. He thought this might save their marriage, but Mary despised the work. Running a sandwich shop was far from the life she had envisioned. It felt like a nightmare to her. It took Robert several years to realize the painful truth. Mary wasn't the dream girl he had idolized in high school. Life had changed her, and their marriage wasn't built on love but rather convenience. Mary seemed to value Robert's financial stability and career prospects more than anything else. Her own childhood had been unhappy, and becoming Robert's wife had given her a taste of a better life. However, she quickly grew bored of the role of a devoted spouse. For 4 years, she tried to maintain the image of a caring wife but eventually gave up. Among her circle, Robert was one of the few decent people, surrounded as she was by shady characters with ties to illegal activities. Even though she had the sandwich shop, a symbol of love and joy to her, it only made her feel more dissatisfied. Whenever Robert left for work on a shoot, the shop was almost always robbed, with all the earnings disappearing. To prevent this, he bought his wife Mary a special safe, but she kept leaving money in the cash register. As it turned out, Mary was behind the thefts herself. Caught up with dubious individuals, she became addicted to an illegal substance, eventually spending all her money on it. Mary also had a daughter, Nicole, who was already a teenager when her mother's life began spiraling out of control. Growing up amidst lies and manipulation, Nicole quickly learned to manipulate others, especially men. Following her mother's example, 16 years old Nicole was attractive and knew how to dress provocatively, frequent bars, and attract attention. The mother and daughter had an unsettling bond. Once, they attended a family wedding wearing matching skin-tight leather jumpsuits, resembling identical cat women. Their choice of attire and behavior made them the center of attention, but not in a good way. Mary often socialized with Nicole's friends, partying in clubs, drinking, and using marijuana alongside them. She turned a blind eye to their young age, dressing provocatively herself in mini skirts, high heels, and revealing tops. Her indulgent lifestyle was funded by her husband Robert, although his concerns were focused more on Nicole. Despite not being Nicole's biological father, Robert deeply cared for her and was troubled by Mary's negative influence. By 1986, after 6 years of turbulent marriage, Robert realized their relationship was beyond repair. Mary left to live in a rented apartment with Nicole. Robert was heartbroken while Mary reveled in her freedom, continuing to live lavishly off his financial support. She spent extravagantly on luxury items, trips, and banned substances. Although Robert kept paying her bills, he held on to the hope that she might someday change and return to him. Mary, however, had no intention of reforming or rekindling their relationship. By the winter holidays of 1988, Robert hit a breaking point. Preparing to spend Christmas alone, he resolved to move forward with his life. Having turned 40 that fall, he seriously contemplated divorce. Though they had been living apart for 2 years, they were still legally married, and Mary realized that divorce would be financially devastating for her. Instead, she began plotting a sinister alternative, becoming a widow. Desperation drove Mary to look for someone who could get rid of Robert for her. She spoke often and openly about her hatred for him, but her constant complaints made others dismiss her as all talk. A few individuals initially agreed to help her, taking her money for the job, only to disappear. This disappointed her and also showed the unreliable nature of those collaborators. Convinced that her diminishing looks were the reason for her failed attempts, Mary used her daughter Nicole in her scheme. Believing that Nicole's youth and beauty could be an advantage, she encouraged Nicole to find someone capable of killing Robert. Despite her efforts, finding the right person took time. Mary eventually turned to a man named James Jim Bernstein. James was a shady, deceitful man, a loner with no friends and a reputation for selling illegal substances. In Hollywood, a city of relentless ambition, his life lacked purpose or direction. For Mary, however, he became the perfect pawn. She pushed Nicole into starting a relationship with James, drawing them both into her dark plan without hesitation. A responsible parent would protect their child from dangerous individuals like James, but Mary was far from a caring or rational mother. Instead, Mary deliberately put her daughter in harm's way, using her as a tool to accomplish her murderous goal. James was ecstatic. He rarely received attention from girls, so he couldn't believe his luck when Nicole showed interest in him. In his excitement, he even proposed to her and gave her a ring. However, for 16-year-old Nicole, this was just a game. She was dating two young men at the same time, both eager to marry her, and she would swap engagement rings depending on whom she was meeting. Unaware that he was only one of two fiancés, James was deeply in love and truly believed Nicole was his future wife. Meanwhile, Mary, Nicole's mother, often told James that her ex-husband, Robert, was an abusive and dangerous man. She claimed he had harmed Nicole when she was a child and later assaulted her as she grew older. To support her accusations, Mary showed bruises on her neck and shoulders, claiming Robert had attacked her during a meeting. In reality, the bruises were from a recent plastic surgery procedure. Naive and gullible, James believed Mary's every word. His resentment and hatred toward Robert grew stronger by the day, exactly what Mary and Nicole wanted. They manipulated James, fueling his anger to the point where he felt compelled to take justice into his own hands. He was convinced he needed to protect the girl he loved from her evil stepfather. Mary and Nicole had essentially turned James into an unwitting pawn in their plan. Despite their claims, Robert was never abusive. Nevertheless, Mary and Nicole's lies successfully destroyed his reputation, filling James with a consuming desire to act. Around the holidays, Mary learned that Robert was planning to file for divorce. Seizing the opportunity, she gave James $1,500 to keep him invested in their scheme and ensure he followed through with their plan. Although Robert maintained occasional contact with Mary and Nicole, he had a growing sense that something bad was about to happen. He even told relatives that he had lived a fulfilling life and achieved everything he wanted. Ready to move on with his life, he was determined to end his marriage to Mary. His ominous feelings, however, later proved to be well-founded. Mary, unfaltering in her sinister plan, continued putting on a convincing act as a caring mother in the dim bars of the San Fernando Valley. She deceived James so completely that he even enlisted a friend to help carry out the attack. On the evening of December 7, 1988, Robert returned home from work and took a shower. As he stepped out of the bathroom, he was ambushed. He was struck on the head with the butt of a shotgun, a brutal blow that knocked him unconscious but did not kill him. His attackers then put a pillow over his head and fired a fatal shot. At just 40 years old, Robert was dead. It's unclear whether James pulled the trigger, his friend did, or if they carried out the act together. No matter how the events unfolded, Robert was murdered, and Mary knew it. The second part of Mary's plan soon unfolded. Fully aware that Robert was dead, she left numerous voicemails on his answering machine in an effort to create an alibi and distance herself from the crime. For 2 days, Robert's lifeless body lay in the hallway while Mary repeatedly sent messages to prove her innocence. Finally, Mary and Nicole arrived at the house. Although James had been instructed to stage the crime scene to look like a robbery, he fled after the murder, failing to complete the task. To cover for him, Mary and Nicole ransacked the house themselves. They pulled out drawers, overturned furniture, and broke open the front door with a crowbar, aiming to make it look like burglars had invaded. Once they were satisfied with their work, Mary called 911, claiming that she hadn't heard from Robert in days and had found him dead in his home. The plan seemed to go exactly as she had intended. The police initially believed Mary's story and began searching for the supposed culprit. However, from the start, the details seemed suspicious. The attack appeared amateurish, and detectives quickly realized there had been no actual burglary, it was all staged. Mary's plan was full of flaws. She forgot to take anything valuable, a mistake investigators noticed immediately. At the police station, Mary played the role of a devastated widow. She attempted to manipulate detectives with flirtatious behavior to appear vulnerable and deflect tough questions, but this only deepened their suspicions. The police were unconvinced by Mary's performance. They believed she was involved in Robert's death but lacked the evidence to prove it. Without sufficient proof, Mary walked away unscathed, continuing to present herself as a grieving widow. However, her behavior didn't match her role. She seemed more concerned with appearances than mourning her husband's death, fretting over her funeral outfit and ultimately arriving at the church in a tight, revealing black dress that drew disapproval from Robert's family. At the funeral, Mary behaved as if she were at a party rather than mourning her husband. With Robert gone, Mary's life significantly improved. She inherited all his assets, received $250,000 from his life insurance, and moved into his house. Instead of cleaning the bloodstains on the carpet where his body was found, she and Nicole casually covered them with another rug and moved on. After handling these formalities, Mary embraced her new lifestyle. She coped with her husband's death by purchasing a Porsche, shopping at luxury boutiques, and indulging in expensive comforts. She even threw herself a lavish birthday party, complete with a limo and a new condo in Cancun as her gift to herself. Mary finally achieved the lifestyle she believed she deserved, but her newfound comfort wasn't without challenges. James, Nicole's fake fiancé, began to realize he'd been used as a pawn in Mary and Nicole's scheme. Watching the two women live extravagantly while he was cast aside filled him with resentment. Struggling with guilt and anger, James hinted that he was fed up and considering going to the police to reveal everything he knew. It seemed he was on the verge of exposing Mary's perfect new life. Mary, however, wasn't one to leave loose ends. She quickly identified James as a threat and made him her next target. Once again, she exploited vulnerable individuals to do her dirty work. This time, she manipulated Paul Edwin Gall, a struggling addict with a tragic past. Paul lost his brother to substance addiction, and since James was a dealer of banned substances, Mary convinced Paul that James was responsible for his brother's death and deserved to die. To guarantee her plan succeeded, she also recruited a desperate young couple burdened by debt, promising to erase their financial troubles in exchange for their help in eliminating James. While most grieving widows seek solace or time away, Mary had an entirely different agenda during her trip to Cancun. Her version of grieving involved a luxury vacation, a new boyfriend, and a photo shoot in her hotel room. The trip wasn't about finding peace, it was to set up an alibi while the hitmen she'd hired carried out her plan against James. During the photo shoot, Mary even posed naked, covered in dollar bills, and grinning widely, a playful but incriminating picture that would later come back to haunt her. By this time, Mary had spent most of the inheritance she'd received after Robert's death 6 months earlier. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, James, her next unwitting victim, was about to meet the same fate as Robert. Paul and his friend Daryl Ray Edwards were amateurs when it came to carrying out a hit. Nervous before targeting James, they tried to calm their nerves by drinking some beers. In reality, it was far more than a few, as a drunken Paul struggled to even get into the car that Mary had provided. Inside that same car, James was sitting in the front seat, unaware he was being set up. Paul and Daryl had convinced him that they were planning to steal illegal substances. However, their real plan was much darker. They intended to strangle him. James fought back and refused to die without a fight. He tried to escape but couldn't manage to flee in time. Paul attacked him, hitting him repeatedly in the throat before strangling him with his bare hands. Afterward, they dumped James's lifeless body in a ravine, taking his ID and discarding it along the way. Returning home, the men continued partying as if nothing had happened. It took authorities a month to find James's body. When investigators searched his home, they discovered documents linking James to the murder of Robert. Additionally, they found a $25,000 life insurance policy, notably taken out the day after Robert's death. James had listed his fiancée, Nicole, as the sole beneficiary. However, Nicole left James soon after. In the end, James turned out to be a fool, unable to tell what was real and what was an illusion. When detectives questioned Mary, she admitted to meeting James in a bar, where she complained about her husband, Robert. She claimed to have no idea that her words could push James to act against Robert. According to Mary, James likely wanted to impress Nicole, her daughter, or protect her by punishing Robert, the stepfather he viewed as evil. A new development in the case emerged when the police began questioning people who knew James. Among them, a neighbor of Paul's confessed the whole truth. The reason was that Paul, while drunk, accidentally revealed everything. Facing the potential of execution for James's murder, Paul moved quickly to save himself, betraying Mary to the authorities in exchange for a deal. Mary, who had previously escaped justice for 2 other crimes, resorted to her manipulative tendencies when questioned. She desperately tried to talk her way out of the charges, but her usual charm had no effect. The officers saw through her lies and arrested her, leaving she in complete shock. She had never anticipated such an outcome. At trial, Mary portrayed herself as a distraught widow, claiming the police were framing her out of spite. According to her, officers had pursued her romantically, and when she rejected them, they targeted her out of revenge. However, her attempts to play the victim fell flat compared to the prosecution's solid evidence. The defense called Mary's frail, elderly parents to the stand as witnesses. In a heartbreaking plea, they begged the jury for leniency, speaking of her difficult childhood. However, they appeared oblivious to the lavish lifestyle Mary enjoyed, which included a condo in Cancun and a brand new Porsche. Despite her wealth, Mary had neglected her struggling parents, visiting them only once during her year of indulgence. The most damning evidence against Mary was a photograph that spread rapidly throughout the media. In the image, Mary was nude, draped only in dollar bills, exuding an air of greed and vanity. The picture solidified her reputation as a manipulative and selfish woman, earning her the nickname the Green Widow. Ultimately, it was this photograph that sealed her fate, sentencing her to California's death row. Mary Ellen is one of 20 women currently on death row in California, all of whom are incarcerated at the Central California Prison for Women. Now 71, she has been in prison for nearly 24 years without an execution date. Paul testified against Mary in court. Having already served his sentence, he was granted parole. His accomplice, Darrell Ray Edwards, remained in prison to finish out his term. Meanwhile, Mary's daughter, Nicole, was never charged. She changed her name, started a family, and chose to erase all traces of her past. Robert, remembered as a loving and hard-working man, was buried in his hometown, the victim of a cruel conspiracy born out of his devotion and care. And Mary, chasing her ultimate fantasy of being the star in her own dramatic tale, learned the hard way that not all dreams come true, especially when they're built on lies, manipulation, and destruction. Carla Godoy, born in Honduras in November 1984, was cherished by her loved ones for her kindness and selflessness. She gave more than she ever asked for, and her generosity was matched by her remarkable strength. From a young age, she worked diligently to build a better future, driven not just by ambition but by quiet resilience. In her 20s, she made the life-changing decision to leave Honduras and move to Valencia, Spain, to join her mother. Later, she became a Spanish citizen. In Spain, her life blossomed, she fell in love, got married, and gave birth to her daughter, Sofia. However, when her relationship with Sofia's father ended, she decided to start afresh. She left Spain and relocated to the United Kingdom. By 2020, Carla was living in England and working for a cleaning company. It was there that she met Jorge Minaya Garay, a Peruvian-born man nearly 10 years her senior who also held Spanish citizenship. Their relationship grew steadily, and they moved in together in a modest home in Dartford, a quiet town in Kent, southeast England. After living together for a year and a half, they planned their dream vacation to Peru, Jorge's homeland. There, Carla would meet his family and visit iconic landmarks, including Machu Picchu. In September 2022, Jorge and Carla arrived in Lima and soon made their way to Machu Picchu. For Carla, the trip was not merely about sightseeing but also a journey of discovery, healing, and rediscovering herself. Throughout the trip, she kept in touch with her family and regularly shared photos of her happy and radiant appearance. She planned to return to the UK on September 23rd, with a short detour to Spain to reunite with her daughter, who was staying with her father. On September 22nd, Carla called her mother one last time. She mentioned that she and Jorge were in a taxi heading north of Lima to visit Jorge's grandmother. Her tone revealed no distress, no concern, everything seemed normal. It was the last time anyone heard from her. After that call, Carla's social media activity ceased, Jorge's accounts went silent, and there were no further calls, messages, or updates. Carla's family became worried. They tried to contact her but received no response. At first, they hoped it was just a temporary loss of signal in a remote area. However, as hours turned into days, their concern grew into fear that something was terribly wrong. By late September, Carla's family filed a missing person report in Peru and alerted the Spanish police in Valencia, where she had previously lived. The Peruvian police officially began their investigation on October 3rd, initially treating the case as a potential kidnapping. However, as time passed, the situation took a darker turn. Carla was not just a missing tourist, she was a devoted mother. Her disappearance devastated her family. Her brother, Eric Godoy, became the family's spokesperson. He described the close bond they shared and vowed to do everything he could to find her. He emphasized that Carla had a life she would never willingly abandon, especially her child. Then came a chilling discovery. Carla had never boarded her flight to leave Peru. However, Jorge did. Official records showed that on October 1st, Jorge quietly left Peru alone, offering no explanation about Carla's absence. He flew to Chile, specifically to the city of Curacao. From there, records confirmed he had a ticket to London via Brazil. He arrived back in the United Kingdom on October 4th. What stunned Carla's family even further were Jorge's actions after his return. He emptied their shared home in Dartford, taking all of Carla's belongings, including her clothes, documents, and personal items. The apartment was stripped of any evidence of her presence. For Eric, this was no coincidence. To him, it was a grim indication that something had gone horribly wrong. Jorge's refusal to communicate, no calls, no messages, no response to the family or police, only deepened their fears. Frustration grew as Eric criticized the lack of action by Spanish authorities. Despite Carla being a Spanish citizen, the embassy in Lima had failed to respond with urgency. Adding to the confusion, Jorge was allowed to leave Peru without being questioned, even though Carla had already been reported missing. Seeking answers, a team from the Peruvian TV program 24 Horas followed the only clue Carla had given her mother. She had mentioned visiting Jorge's grandmother. They traced a small, modest house in Villa Huerta Nazaret, located in Carabelo, north of Lima. The address matched Jorge's official ID. Inside, the elderly woman confirmed Jorge had been there a few days earlier but claimed to know nothing about Carla's disappearance. Meanwhile, the Peruvian police's Missing Persons Division intensified their search. They investigated 5 homes in the Ventanilla district and expanded their operations to areas like Puente Piedra and Carabelo. However, every lead brought more questions than answers. Then, in mid-October, the silence was broken in the worst possible way. Jorge, now 46 and considered a fugitive, made 2 phone calls, one to Eric and another to the police. In both calls, he confessed to killing Carla. The family's worst fears were confirmed in Jorge's own words. The recording of the call was soon shared with the media. Jorge's trembling voice, choked with sobs, admitted to ending Carla's life and revealed where her body was buried. He disclosed it was on his grandmother's property and said he was consumed with guilt, unable to face anyone. Jorge included disturbing details about how to access the burial site, through a back bathroom in a modest house. His words also carried an ominous undertone as he hinted at contemplating a final decision, which added urgency for authorities to act quickly. In Peru, detectives from the Missing Persons Division immediately headed to the location Jorge described, a property on the northern outskirts of Lima, still owned by his family. With his confession and the address in hand, police arrived at the house on October 12 around 3 p.m. Jorge's brother, who was present, initially denied knowing his whereabouts. But the investigators were determined to uncover the truth. The search began immediately. Officers painstakingly worked for over 10 hours, digging and examining every section of the property. Just before 1 a.m. on October 13th, they made a grim discovery. Nearly 2 meters underground, tightly wrapped in a blue plastic tarp, they found Carla's remains. She had been missing for 20 days. Initial speculation suggested the body might have been burned, but forensic teams later confirmed it had not been incinerated, just carefully concealed. With the discovery, the case was handed over to the Homicide Division, which was already on site to begin a full-scale investigation. The tragic news devastated Carla's family and shocked the public, deeply invested in the case. Although some questions were answered, many more emerged. What drove Jorge to such a horrific act? Was it jealousy or possessiveness? One theory linked it to Carla's regular communication with Sofia's father, a necessary arrangement for co-parenting their daughter, but perhaps one that fueled Jorge's insecurities or resentment. In his confession, Jorge claimed Carla had attacked him first with a knife and that he acted in self-defense. However, investigators remained skeptical. They suspected Jorge did not act alone and believed someone may have helped during the crime or in disposing of Carla's body. There was even uncertainty regarding whether the murder took place at the house where her body was found. Each piece of evidence seemed to raise more questions than answers. The pressure to bring Jorge to justice grew stronger with each passing day. Peruvian officials announced that, once captured, he would be extradited to Peru to face trial for murder. However, Jorge remained in hiding, deepening the sorrow and frustration of Carla's family and supporters. Shortly after her body was recovered, a forensic report revealed that she had died from mechanical asphyxiation. Her family was devastated. Carla, a woman who crossed borders in search of love and opportunity, was tragically murdered by the person she trusted most. Carla's sister went to Peru after receiving the shocking news and spoke publicly about Carla. She described Carla as a God-fearing, resilient, and hard-working woman who was deeply devoted to her family. However, she also disclosed troubling details. Carla had confided concerns about Jorge before her death, expressing feelings of being monitored and controlled. Jorge allegedly tracked her expenses, questioned her decisions, and displayed possessive behavior that left her feeling constantly watched. Carla's brother, Eric, confirmed her unease in the relationship, even though she never openly admitted it. What began as a missing person case and later turned into a confirmed homicide also became a grim story of psychological abuse and control. Social media has been flooded with tributes, prayers, and emotional posts in memory of Carla. Former colleagues and employers remembered her as kind-hearted, dedicated, and lovingly devoted to her young daughter. In Carla's honor, they have organized a fundraiser to support her daughter, Sofia, who recently lost her mother. Her family also launched a donation campaign to cover the costs of bringing Carla's body back to Honduras, funeral expenses, airfare for her daughter and mother, and the ongoing legal process, a race against time in their overwhelming grief. On Saturday, October 15th, shortly after Carla's body was recovered, Peruvian authorities intensified their investigation. A critical question lingered: did Jorge act alone? In the United Kingdom, Jorge was arrested during a joint operation with the London Metropolitan Police. He was taken into custody in Kent, where he had lived with Carla before their tragic trip. On October 16th, the Crown Prosecution Service formally charged Jorge with murder, with Kent police confirming close collaboration with Peruvian officials. Jorge appeared in Folkestone Magistrates Court, where he confirmed his personal details through an interpreter but did not plead guilty. That same day, Carla's brother Eric shared an emotional video, demanding justice and voicing his belief that Jorge had not acted alone. Jorge appeared again at Maidstone Crown Court, where he pleaded not guilty to murder. The judge ordered him to remain in custody until his trial, scheduled to begin on April 3, 2023, and set to last several weeks. While Peru initially demanded Jorge's extradition, the UK's Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 allowed British courts to prosecute domestic abuse-related crimes committed abroad if the accused resided in the UK. As the legal process unfolded, Carla's family focused on the painful task of bringing her home. After months of navigating complex logistics and legalities, they succeeded. On February 14, 2023, Carla was laid to rest in La Ceiba, Honduras. Her funeral was a deeply emotional event, where friends and family mourned not just her loss but the immense tragedy of her death. Carla's grief-stricken mother stood before her daughter's coffin, saying she no longer had the strength to cry and wanted nothing more than justice, a battle that had only just begun. In mid-February, investigators from Kent's Serious Crime Directorate traveled to Lima to work alongside the Peruvian National Police and prosecutors. Their goal was to collect undeniable evidence to ensure Jorge could not evade accountability. In Lima, British investigators conducted a key phase of the investigation, visiting the site where Carla's body was buried. They also inspected a nearby property, uncovering materials identical to those used to wrap her body, further solidifying the case against Jorge. The pursuit of justice for Carla was far from over, but after years of silence, her voice finally echoed across courtrooms, governments, and international borders. The trial took place at Maidstone Crown Court in the UK and quickly garnered global attention. It became a landmark case as the first homicide trial prosecuted under the UK's Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 for a crime committed abroad by a UK resident. The jury was presented with harrowing evidence of how Jorge murdered Carla, strangling her with a rope until she stopped breathing. He then wrapped her body in blue plastic and buried her on his grandmother's property. The prosecution highlighted that although the exact motive didn't need to be proven, the evidence revealed a disturbing narrative. Jorge was controlling, jealous, and obsessed. He was particularly paranoid that Carla's ex-husband might discover their relationship through vacation photos, potentially jeopardizing her custody arrangements. In his statement, Jorge claimed that during an argument, Carla attacked him with a knife, cutting his arm, and that he acted in self-defense. He said he grabbed an elastic rope, but everything supposedly became a blur after that, leaving him unable to recall his actions. However, the prosecution dismantled this narrative, stating that a person does not die instantly from neck compression. It takes at least 15 to 30 seconds to lose consciousness and over a minute for death to occur. This was not an act of self-defense or impulsive behavior, it was deliberate and calculated. The nature of Carla's injuries and the circumstances surrounding the crime did not substantiate a claim of self-defense. Instead, the prosecution illustrated a case of domination, not desperation. Jorge did not testify in his defense. His lawyer argued that he acted out of fear rather than cruelty, pointing out that he had no prior history of violence and had expressed remorse. But the jury remained unconvinced. After deliberating for 7 hours, they returned a unanimous verdict in July 2023, guilty of murder. After the conviction, the lead investigator addressed the public, stating, "Carla was murdered in cold blood by a man she trusted. Not only did he kill her, but he also buried her, lied about it, and forced her grieving family to endure the agony of listening to his denials in court." Still, one final step remained: the sentencing. At the end of July 2023, Jorge Minaya Garay was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 17 years before being eligible for parole. The judge denounced Jorge's behavior as obsessive, controlling, and cruel. He stressed that Jorge had not only taken Carla's life but had caused her family unbearable suffering, twice over. Carla had left England with hope in her heart. While she may have had concerns about Jorge, she could never have imagined her trip would end in tragedy. Jorge not only ended her life, he deprived her daughter of a mother and condemned her family to a lifetime of grief. A little girl will grow up with a void that will never be filled, and Jorge attempted to excuse all of this as self-defense, a story no one believed. The jury saw through his lies, the court rejected his claims, and justice was finally delivered. Carla's case resonated far beyond the courtroom. It shattered hearts across the globe, sparked outrage, and ignited urgent conversations about intimate partner violence. A mother was lost, a family was broken, and a preventable crime left devastation in its wake. While the sentence delivered some sense of justice, it could never undo the pain Jorge had inflicted. Nicoli Fernanda Pogora, 15, despite her young age, was known for her kindness, good manners, and positive spirit. She loved studying and drawing, spending hours creating sketches and images. She seemed to understand that art could express more than words. Her mother, Priscilla Magrin, was young and supportive, often telling Nicoli how proud she was. Priscilla frequently shared photos of Nicoli on social media, expressing her love, affection. During her school vacation in mid-2025, Nicoli traveled to Cordoropoulos to visit her grandparents. The city was about 125 miles from her hometown of Mococa. Besides wanting to relax, Nicoli was also eager to meet someone special there. Enrique, a 17-year-old, and Nicoli had known each other since elementary school in Itatiba, where Nicoli's family used to live. Even after Nicoli moved to Mococa, they kept in touch online. Their friendship gradually evolved into a romantic relationship about a month before the tragedy. Although they never met in person, this was Nicoli's first serious relationship, and she cherished it. Talking to Enrique made her happy, understood, and excited about the future. Enrique was presented a complex picture to those who knew him. His relatives saw him as calm and quiet, but also isolated, emotionally detached from his family, and hard to relate to. He rarely joined family events, preferring to be alone. His behavior was worrying, but not alarming enough to prompt intervention. Enrique lived with his father in Itatiba. His mother was not part of his life. However, even when Enrique's father had a recent heart problem, he remained distant. Family members remembered an incident where Enrique hurt their cat, filmed it, and buried the animal. Although only a few people knew about this and no serious action was taken, it was a clear indication of aggressive behavior and a lack of compassion. Evelyn, 14, was a significant person in his life. They had a year-long, intense relationship marked by frequent arguments, emotional drama, and numerous breakups. Family members reported that Evelyn often acted aggressively. In one serious event, she jumped the fence of Enrique's property with a knife, requiring his father to stop her. Despite these incidents, they continued to reconcile. Evelyn's behavior also worried others. Her social media activity revealed an interest in dark and disturbing subjects. She shared unsettling content, used usernames with sinister meanings, and participated in online groups that promoted disturbing material. Some social media users said she behaved aggressively online, even threatening girls who communicated with Enrique. The relationship between Enrique and Evelyn didn't end even after he started dating Nicoli. In fact, his romance with Nicoli appeared to be a calculated ploy, a way to provoke jealousy in his former partner. Nicoli was completely unaware that Evelyn was still deeply involved in Enrique's life and continued to influence him emotionally and psychologically. The atmosphere surrounding Enrique and Evelyn was becoming increasingly toxic. Beneath Enrique's seemingly calm demeanor lurked an emotionally unstable person, whose actions would ultimately lead to devastating consequences. In private messages with a friend, Enrique admitted that he only started seeing Nicoli after seeing Evelyn with another guy at a party. In one message, he confessed he wanted Evelyn back, even saying, "If she wants, I'll get rid of that girl she hates. I don't like her either." That message was clearly referring to Nicoli. These statements revealed not just a lack of emotional attachment, but a chilling level of indifference that hinted at something deeply disturbing. All of these messages were sent before Nicoli went missing, proving Enrique never truly intended to have a genuine relationship with her. He saw Nicoli not as a person, but as a means to an end, a pawn in a manipulative game. Knowing how much she cared for him and that she was willing to travel to see him, he took advantage of her trust in a calculated and emotionally detached way. From Nicoli's perspective, their relationship felt real. She genuinely believed they had something meaningful, that he felt the same way she did. So, when he suggested they meet, she didn't hesitate. Everything unfolded against the backdrop of Enrique's obsession with winning Evelyn back. He was determined to do so at any cost, even if it meant removing what he saw as an obstacle. The idea that Evelyn gave him an ultimatum to get Nicoli out of the picture surfaced later during the investigation. One of the most striking aspects of this case is how Enrique continued to manipulate Nicoli's trust until the very last moment. Nicoli first visited Enrique on Saturday, July 12, staying until Sunday. During this visit, Enrique unexpectedly ended their relationship without explanation. This devastated Nicoli, who had genuine feelings for him and was completely unprepared for the breakup. When she returned to her grandparents' home, she seemed sad but didn't explain what happened. While her mood had clearly changed, no one suspected anything serious. Despite the breakup, Nicoli remained in contact with Enrique, hoping they could get back together. This hope became significant later. On Monday, July 14th, Enrique called and asked to meet. Although it seemed he wanted to discuss the breakup or reconcile, it was actually a trap, part of a pre-planned scheme. After her phone call, Nicoli told her grandmother she wanted to see Enrique again. Because she had visited his house before, her family wasn't worried when she left. Nicoli planned to spend a short time with Enrique and return home that evening, but she never did. When her grandmother called her that night, Nicoli didn't answer. The family became truly worried the next day when more relatives tried calling and couldn't reach her. Nicoli's family had already started searching for her. Enrique's actions after Nicoli disappeared immediately made people suspicious. When Nicoli's family searched for her and contacted him, he said they had broken up and that she had left his house alone. However, when they asked for more information, he was unclear, avoided giving specific details, and didn't seem worried about her. No one knew about any other plans she might have had. It seemed like she went to see Enrique and then vanished. This was sudden, unexplained, and very unlike her. Soon after the search for Nicoli started, Enrique disappeared. He stopped answering his phone, stayed away from his house, and when he did answer calls, he said he'd left town due to alleged threats. His behavior made it seem like he was running away, both to his family and the police. Nicoli's grandfather reported her missing at the Hortolandia police station. Her mother, Priscilla, started an online campaign, sharing photos and asking for assistance. Friends, neighbors joined the search. News of Nicoli's disappearance quickly spread. However, the next 24 hours passed without any news from Nicoli or anyone who had seen her. Meanwhile, Enrique's father began to worry when he found strange things in the house. He saw muddy footprints inside, as if someone had walked in with dirty shoes. Even more concerning, he discovered what looked like bloodstains in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. He tried to talk to Enrique, calling him several times, but Enrique either didn't answer or avoided the questions. Finally, the father decided to contact the police. Enrique's family soon understood the situation was much more serious than a typical teenage fight. They openly shared what they discovered and insisted on a forensic examination of their house. Enrique's family's handling of the situation was remarkable. They didn't make excuses, protect him, or hinder the investigation. His father repeatedly messaged him, urging him to cooperate with the police and tell the truth. However, Enrique didn't respond until the next day, when he claimed innocence and denied any involvement in Nicoli's disappearance. The search for Nicoli continued, but there was no trace of her. Her bank card wasn't used, she didn't post on social media, and there were no new messages or calls on her phone. All evidence suggested she disappeared soon after her last meeting with Enrique, within a very short period. Investigators interviewed Nicoli's and Enrique's friends and family. These interviews revealed that Nicoli and Enrique's relationship was new, lasting only about a month. They also learned that Enrique had previously dated a girl named Evelyn. Based on this information, the authorities began to suspect that Enrique might have been seeing both Nicoli and Evelyn when Nicoli disappeared. The investigation was urgent. The investigation was difficult due to the absence of security camera recordings, witness statements, and cell phone location data. The case only started to gain traction after specialized teams became involved and anonymous tips started coming in. Enrique's family reported that a garden cart was missing from their property after Nicoli visited. Investigators thought the cart might have been used to transport a body to a nearby reservoir. Investigators also found a small lake or lagoon about 500 yards from Enrique's house in the Jardim Amanda area. On July 18th, 4 days after Nicoli's disappearance, the municipal guard searched the area with a K-9 unit. Thor, A search dog used Nicole's clothing to find her scent. After several hours, Thor indicated something at the water's edge. There, authorities discovered a body wrapped in 2 bed sheets and a blue plastic tarp. Large stones were on top, probably to weigh it down and hide it underwater. The body showed signs of extreme violence, multiple stab wounds, bruises on the face, torso, and missing limbs. Forensic experts believe the limbs were removed before the body was moved. These injuries point to a deliberate and extremely violent act intended to harm and disfigure the victim. Investigators also found the letters PCC marked on Nicole's back. This acronym is associated with a well-known Brazilian criminal group, initially suggesting a connection to organized crime. However, law enforcement determined that these groups were not involved. They concluded that the PCC marking was a misleading clue, deliberately placed to send investigators down the wrong path. Family members, including her mother and father, were brought to the scene. Several key elements confirmed the identity of the victim. Nicole's family recognized a black cord necklace she always wore, and the physical characteristics of the body matched hers. Evidence collected at Enrique's house strongly linked the location to the crime. Investigators found a partially burned mattress in the backyard, blood traces, muddy footprints, and the missing garden cart. The sheets found at the discovery site also resembled linens from the home. Based on this, authorities developed a preliminary theory: Nicole lost her life inside the house, and afterward, her body was dismembered, wrapped in household materials, placed in the cart, and transported to the nearby lagoon. The particularly brutal nature of the crime, combined with the attempt to mimic the markings of a known gang, confirmed that this was a premeditated act, not a spontaneous outburst. So, investigators ruled out the possibility of an impulsive confrontation. A second search of Enrique's house revealed a power saw, which investigators believe may have been used to dismember the body. They also found clothing with reddish stains suspected to be blood. These discoveries, along with previous evidence, suggested the crime occurred at the house and helped police create a clear timeline of events based on the evidence. At that moment, Evelyn also became a suspect. Previously, she wasn't seen as directly involved. But new witness statements and phone record analysis changed the investigation's focus. Another key event was the discovery that a message was sent from Nicole's phone to a group chat on July 15th. This initially suggested she might be alive, but forensic analysis proved she didn't write it. The message was sent from her phone after she was already dead. This was a crucial finding. Investigators concluded the message was a planned attempt to fake Nicole's activity online, probably to slow down the search and distort the timeline. This act appeared to be part of a plan to hide the crime. On July 20th, 2025, 6 days after Nicole's body was found, police located Enrique and Evelyn in Cordorópolis. They were hiding in the home of one of Evelyn's grandmothers. The relative had been sheltering them and hadn't contacted the police. Enrique and Evelyn were arrested without resistance. They'd taken in for questioning. During initial questioning, Enrique and Evelyn admitted their involvement in the crime. Enrique confessed that he tricked Nicole into coming to the house by pretending he wanted to reconcile. Then, he and Evelyn committed the crime together. He also stated they had planned it beforehand, discussing their intent to deal with Nicole. Investigators confirmed that Evelyn knew about the plan and was present at Enrique's house when the crime happened. The evidence suggests they acted together. After they confessed and were arrested, the case moved to the legal review stage. The police classified the crime as intentional and aggravated by dismemberment, hiding evidence, and the involvement of multiple people. Although the crime was serious, Brazilian law limits the punishment due to the suspects' ages. However, investigators requested the maximum possible sentence, emphasizing the cruelty, planning, and lack of emotion shown by both Enrique and Evelyn. Nicole was buried in her hometown of Mococa on July 20, 2025. Her funeral was a somber occasion, filled with immense sadness. Family, friends, neighbors, and even strangers, all deeply affected by the tragic circumstances of her death, came to the cemetery to mourn her. Nicole's mother, Priscilla, was initially too devastated to speak. However, after recovering somewhat, she declared that she sought justice, not sympathy, for her daughter's death. Even though the crime was fully understood and the perpetrators confessed, the court couldn't criminally punish them. Brazilian law states that those under 18 aren't tried as adults. Instead, the Estatuto de Criança e do Adolescente protects their rights. The ECA allows individuals to stay in a closed rehabilitation center for up to 3 years. Their progress will be reviewed every 6 months. Enrique and Evelyn were sent to Fundação Casa Andorinhas, Campinas, a rehabilitation facility, after their arrest. A juvenile court judge will make further decisions about their case. They are currently under a 45-day supervision order, which may be extended to the maximum of 3 years. This situation has caused public anger. People on social media, local news, community activists, and government officials are upset, believing the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Nicole's mother publicly stated, her daughter was robbed of her life, and her killers will be released before they are even adults. Her statement expressed both her deep sorrow and her feeling that the legal system failed to deliver justice for the violent crime committed by minors. The family maintained that Nicole's death was not an accident but a planned attack, showing no regret or mental instability from the perpetrators. The case sparked outrage across Brazil. Online petitions demanded changes to the ECA to allow for harsher punishments for minors who commit premeditated crimes. Demonstrations with the slogan "Justiça por Nicole" took place in various cities. Protesters urged lawmakers to amend the laws so that these crimes would be visibly punished. Legal experts have pointed out that the laws regarding juvenile crime were created in the 1990s to protect vulnerable young people. However, they contend that the types of crimes committed by minors have changed considerably since then. Nicole's situation shows how laws meant to be kind can clash with the real harm caused by crimes. Some worry that being too easy on young criminals might seem like we don't care about the victims. For Nicole's family, this case is about honoring her memory and ensuring people understand she was a person, not just a statistic. Nicole's name now represents a fight against indifference and negligence. Her story is still being shared in news articles and discussed in schools, online, and by lawmakers. This case made many people realize for the first time how age can be used to avoid serious consequences. Even though the court's decision was limited by the law, the public still believes justice wasn't served, and their voices are still being heard. On April 14, 2024, after almost 2 weeks of searching, police in a remote area of rural Oklahoma made a grim discovery. They found the bodies of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, 2 women who were missing on March 30th. After family reported them missing, the search began. Investigators' first clue was Veronica's car, found parked on a back road near the Kansas border. The car doors were closed, but the inside was messy. Nearby, police found her glasses and a hammer with a broken handle. Blood was found on the road and inside the car. The search then expanded to several miles around the car. Searchers used drones, K-9 units, heavy machinery, and volunteers. Eventually, they traced a signal to a private farm in Texas County. Investigators discovered that on March 29th, Tad Burt Cullum rented the farm, saying he needed to cut down a tree and bury construction waste. This gave him a reason to use equipment and work on the land. When authorities arrived at the farm, they found an area of disturbed soil. Blood stains were also found on abandoned clothes of the victims. A dark hoodie, jeans, and shoes, all covered in blood. Near the clothing, investigators found a bloody knife. Because of these discoveries, investigators quickly determined that the victims did not disappear by accident. They passed the case to the state's Bureau of Investigation. The main questions became, who planned and carried out this execution in the remote countryside, and why? On March 30th, Veronica Butler left Hugoton, Kansas, to pick up her sons for a weekend visit. By court order, visitation is scheduled every Saturday. Jillian Kelly, a preacher's wife, went with her. They planned to drive from Hugoton to Eva, Oklahoma, about 30 miles away, mainly on a rural highway. Tiffany Adams, the paternal grandmother of Veronica's children, was scheduled to meet them at a gas station in Eva. She was to meet the children there. Wrangler Cole Rickman, their father, was in rehab and unable to meet them himself. Mobile data indicates that Veronica and Jillian left Hugoton at 8 a.m. Their phones were active until 9:42 a.m., when both phones switched off at the same time. Family members tried to call them, but they didn't answer. Because they were expected for a visitation at a specific time, this raised immediate concern. Veronica's family quickly began searching. By noon, they had found their first lead, her abandoned car. When officers arrived, they found several pieces of evidence. Inside the car was Jillian's bag, which contained an empty holster and a phone charger. However, her weapon was missing. Phones, IDs, and wallets were also gone. These details suggested the car was abandoned quickly. The area was immediately secured. Authorities searched nearby farms, ravines, and abandoned buildings. Because neither woman had made contact, authorities suspected a possible abduction. However, the case stalled due to a lack of witnesses. The media reported the disappearance of Veronica and Jillian. The news spread rapidly. Local residents, church groups, and advocacy organizations began searching. Phone records and location data provided the only clear information about that morning. Tiffany Adams called Veronica around 9 a.m. Tiffany claimed Veronica canceled their meeting. However, cell tower data and the vehicle's location indicated that Veronica and Jillian were already close to the gas station, where they planned to meet. Veronica always prioritized her sons, even though her relationship with their father, Wrangler Cole Rickman, was difficult. They were never married but had 2 sons together. Their relationship problems started long before they separated in December 2018. After the breakup, they decided to co-parent. In February 2019, Wrangler requested shared custody through the courts. The court decided that Veronica would have primary responsibility for the children, while Wrangler would have limited visitation. This meant the boys spent alternate weeks with each parent. This arrangement continued for several months until Veronica moved to Colorado without a formal agreement or court order. Over the next 2 years, she moved 4 times, living in 3 different states. Wrangler claims these frequent moves disrupted the boys' lives and caused him concern. In 2020, Wrangler requested full custody of his sons. As part of his case, he presented evidence suggesting the boys were neglected while visiting Veronica. He claimed they returned home hungry, with bruises, and what looked like animal bites. Wrangler also stated that Veronica frequently left the children with relatives or friends without telling him. A significant concern during the custody case was the allegation that Veronica's brother had been aggressive towards her sons in the past. Although the court ordered the uncle to have no contact with the children, it was discovered that he was still spending time with them, which raised concerns for the judge. Meanwhile, Veronica accused Wrangler of abusing their sons, filing 5 complaints accusing him of physically abusing the children. However, investigations determined these accusations were false. For example, she claimed Wrangler choked their son and provided photos of bruises, but the son later confessed that Veronica had asked him to lie about the incident. This confession significantly impacted the court's assessment of Veronica's claims. After hearing evidence and evaluating both parents, the court decided that Wrangler could provide a more stable home. The court found Veronica to be an unreliable caregiver because she often hid information and used manipulative behaviors. Therefore, the court limited her visits to 1 supervised visit per week, on Saturdays, with a third party present. This loss of custody was devastating for Veronica. She had always wanted to be an active part of her sons' lives. The court's decision felt like she was losing her rights as a parent and a part of her identity. However, even these brief visits with her sons were now affected by things she couldn't control. She decided to focus on improving her education, career, and personal life. Wrangler was granted primary custody by the court, making him the legal guardian. However, his mother, Tiffany, took over the daily care of the child. This change happened because Wrangler experienced personal difficulties. In early 2024, he was ordered to attend rehabilitation for alcohol and substance abuse. He was also charged with illegal firearm possession, which further complicated his legal situation. Due to these issues, he was unable to care for the child both physically and legally for several months. While Wrangler was away, Tiffany took over caring for his sons. She lived with her partner, Tad Burt Cullum, and their home became the boys' main residence. Even though Tiffany wasn't their legal guardian, she quickly took charge. She prevented Veronica, even her own son, from seeing the children. Witnesses said Tiffany did more than just provide temporary help, she acted as their parent. People who knew the family said Tiffany was strict, controlling, she often aggressive and unpredictable. She was known to threaten and intimidate others. Wrangler said his mother often interfered with his visits with his sons and threatened him if he didn't do what she wanted. He reported that she once threatened to use a weapon if he went against her. Tiffany's behavior was well known in the community, and even neighbors were worried about her actions. Tiffany consistently broke the visitation agreement. She frequently caused conflict by changing meeting times without warning, refusing to release the children, and adding requirements at the last minute. Veronica tried to adhere to the legal agreement, but Tiffany resisted her efforts. Despite Veronica having the right to weekly visits, they only occurred if Tiffany allowed them. Because Child Protective Services didn't oversee the situation, Tiffany wasn't responsible to any organization. This gave her complete power over the visits. Tad, Tiffany's partner, also caused worries for people in the neighborhood. Neighbors describe him as hot-tempered and secluded person. They noted that he always agreed with Tiffany. Police records said he owns guns and ammunition. Although some people worry about his interaction with Tiffany's grandchildren, there is no legal basis to stop him near them. After the unfavorable court decision, Veronica significantly changed her life by early 2024. She started focusing on stability, obeying the law, and avoiding arguments. She found a stable job and began studying to become a surgical technician in a college medical program. She chose this career because it offered job security, a chance to help people, and proof that she could be responsible. Besides work and school, Veronica started going to a nearby church. There, she quickly became good friends with Jillian Kelly, a dedicated member of the church. Jillian had experience raising children, was passionate about helping women and young people. She was well regarded in the community. During a difficult period in Veronica's life, Jillian became a supportive friend and advisor. They communicated frequently, developing a close bond. Jillian offered advice, emotional support, and helped Veronica feel more secure. Additionally, Jillian assisted Veronica with legal matters related to regaining her parental rights by reviewing documents and consulting with lawyers. Although Jillian wasn't directly involved in the legal proceedings, her support helped Veronica stay calm and focused. In March 2024, Veronica asked the court to increase the time to visit with her sons. She asked the court to eliminate required supervision during her visits and to make the visits longer. To support her request, she presented evidence of improvements in her life and the lack of any recent negative events, including letters of recommendation from her college professors. The court also took into account the father, Wrangler's growing difficulties. He had been mandated to attend rehabilitation after being arrested for illegal firearm possession and relapsing into substance abuse. Although he remained the legal guardian, he was unable to properly care for his children. Veronica had an appointment for the trial on April 17, 2024, to consider her request to modify her visitation rights. She felt optimistic, as her lawyer thought there was a strong case for reinstating some of her parental rights. In the 2 weeks before the hearing, Veronica and her team worked hard to prepare. They gathered more records, identified witnesses, and built a strong case focusing on Tiffany's repeated violations. Veronica knew this was her chance to rebuild her relationship with her sons. She had followed all previous court orders and worked with social services. During this time, Veronica became closer to Jillian, who helped her with travel, went with her to meetings, and agreed to testify for her. By early spring 2024, Veronica had improved her life and taken steps to be a mother again. The upcoming court hearing was supposed to be the turning point where her parental rights would be officially restored. Unfortunately, this hope would soon be destroyed. Veronica's visit on March 30th was supervised by Jillian Kelly instead. The plan was simple. Veronica and Jillian would pick up Tiffany and her sons and Eva, take them to a private family event, and bring them back at the arranged time. They were supposed to meet at a gas station, about 45 minutes from Hugoton. Veronica and Jillian's phones show they were on track to arrive there. However, no one was at the gas station when they arrived. Tiffany claimed the plan was suddenly canceled due to a phone call and last-minute changes. But this doesn't match the digital evidence or the timeline. On April 3, 2024, the case changed significantly due to a surprising witness. A 16-year-old girl, who lives with her mother Cora Twombly and stepfather Cole Earl Twombly, was interviewed by law enforcement. She revealed information that shifted the investigation's focus. Before her testimony, Cora and Cole were not considered suspects. However, the teen stated that since early March, Cora, Cole, Tiffany Adams, Tad, and Paul Grice had been meeting regularly at her home. She said the group called themselves God's Misfits and often talked about rejecting the legal system. These secret meetings took place in Cora and Cole's bedroom. The conversations frequently mentioned Veronica Butler. The girl recalled her mother saying, "They won't have to worry about Veronica anymore." Other phrases she heard included, "It's all planned. It'll be over by the weekend. The road she always takes," and references to a secluded location where things could be properly hidden. These discussions made the girl uncomfortable. She said they kept stun guns at home and used special phones that were charged separately, but she didn't know why. She also remembered Tiffany bringing bags of unknown items that were quickly taken away. On the day Veronica and Jillian disappeared, the teen woke up early and found the adults already gone. They returned around noon and seemed stressed. Cora told her daughter to immediately clean the inside of their white pickup truck without saying why. When the teen asked why, Cole said things hadn't gone as planned but told her not to worry. The teenager testified that the plan to harm Veronica began weeks in advance, possibly as early as February. The group even discussed causing an accident for Veronica's car. Although this plan was never carried out because Veronica stayed home that day, the discussion proved they intended to harm her well before her disappearance. According to the teenager, Tiffany started the meetings, arguing that Veronica was harming the boys and shouldn't be a mother. She strongly encouraged the others to act to protect her grandsons. Cora, Cole, and Tad all agreed with her immediately. The 16-year-old's girl official statements were used to obtain search warrants and authorize surveillance. Although she wasn't involved in the group's activities, her account helped investigators understand the timeline and reasoning behind the planning. Her information formed the basis for the next stage of the investigation. The murder of Veronica and Jillian was made as planned. The perpetrators ambushed Veronica on a rural road she regularly used for weekend visits with her children. Confessions later revealed that they blocked the road, forcing Veronica to take a detour onto a less used path. This tactic lured both women into an area where the group had complete control. Veronica and Jillian were not ready for what happened. The scene showed signs of a struggle, and the suspects had injuries, suggesting a sudden fight. For example, Tad had fresh scratches on his face and neck when he was arrested. Investigators think one of the victims caused these scratches while trying to defend herself. Cole tried to hide the scratches with a new beard, but experts determined it was only a few days old. His injuries and forensic evidence show that at least one victim fought back strongly. Investigators believe Veronica was the original target of the crime. However, a teenage witness stated that her mother, Cora, considered Jillian an enemy, not simply an innocent bystander. So, the decision was made to target both Veronica and Jillian. To hide their involvement, the group planned a burial site away from major roads, inside a freezer. Tad, with the permission of the landowner, created a grave on the evening of March 29th. Cell phone records showed that disposable phones registered to Tiffany and other members were used in the area of the ambush on the morning it happened. Later that day, 2 of those phones were tracked near the farm where the bodies were discovered. This helped investigators map the suspects' movements on the day of the crime. Investigators suspect Cora and Cole used their pickup truck to move the victims. In their home, police found clothes with dark stains suspected to be blood, a black knife, and clothing matching descriptions provided by witnesses. Digital forensics showed that the phones were only used for communication within the group. They avoided using landlines. Calls were short, and most activity took place between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. This timeframe aligns with when the crime occurred. This indicates a planned effort to hide activity and make it difficult to follow. Tiffany's search history, recovered from her linked devices, contained alarming queries: how to make someone leave their home, where to buy a stun gun, untraceable phone, done without license, and how to get rid of a body. More evidence was found at the farm where Veronica and Jillian's bodies were discovered. Blood stain at the burial site matched the DNA of Veronica and Jillian. Biological traces linked to Ted, Cole, and Paul were also present. An empty gun registered to Jillian was found, suggesting she may have tried to defend herself. As she was legally permitted to carry a weapon because of her community role, investigators suspect she either couldn't access her gun quickly enough or it was seized at the start of the attack. Footprints in the vehicle used were not Jillian or Veronica's. Soil from the vehicle's tire treads matched the soil at the burial site. Finally, hair strands containing Jillian's DNA were found inside the vehicle's trunk lining. The official criminal indictment was based on the investigation's findings. Technical and biological evidence proved that the abduction, isolation, and murder of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly were carefully planned. The perpetrators used secure communication methods and intentionally tried to destroy evidence. On April 12, 2024, law enforcement announced the arrest of 5 suspects in connection with the disappearance and deaths of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly, Tiffany Adams, Tad Burt Cullum, Cora Twombly, Cole Earl Twombly, and Paul Grice. All 5 were booked into the Texas County Jail and charged with abduction, double homicide, and conspiracy. When officers searched Ted's home, they found evidence suggesting he was planning a violent act. This evidence included a semi-automatic shotgun, ammunition, a bulletproof vest, and a go bag. The go bag contained flashlights, gloves, zip ties, and a change of clothes. They also found a large amount of cash, possibly indicating he planned to escape after committing the crime. Searching the other suspects' homes, investigators found mobile devices, documents, stained clothing, and materials used to hide bodies. Based on the evidence, investigators believe at least 2 suspects buried the bodies, while others transported them, coordinated the operation, and handled communications. When arrests were made, prosecutors already had significant evidence. This included DNA, location data putting suspects at the crime scene, and the key testimony of a 16-year-old witness. Because of the strength of the evidence, prosecutors charged the suspects with the most serious crimes possible, including first-degree murder. Initially, Tiffany denied any connection to Veronica and Jillian's disappearance. She claimed she didn't know where they were and hadn't seen them the day they vanished. However, the evidence presented by the prosecution contradicted her claims. Also, Paul, one of the suspects, confessed his involvement and agreed to help with the investigation when confronted with the evidence. Cole, a key person in the case, had been previously investigated for illegally owning guns. Cora was known to attend extreme religious meetings and oppose government involvement in family issues. Investigators believe this ideology contributed to her motivation for the crime. The charges against all 5 suspects included 2 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, conspiracy to commit a felony, obstruction of justice, and unlawful possession of firearms. Just 10 days before the incident, Veronica and her attorney successfully scheduled a new court hearing for April 17, with a strong chance of reclaiming extended visitation rights. The risk of Tiffany losing custody is believed to have triggered the group's premature and extreme actions. The crime carried a deep emotional weight, especially because it targeted individuals who had no connection to the conflict beyond their personal circumstances. Investigators also uncovered ties between the suspects and a loosely organized radical group calling themselves God's Misfits. This group promoted anti-government views and claimed its members were not bound by U.S. laws. In 2023, one of the suspects, Paul, even filed paperwork in an attempt to renounce his American citizenship. However, after the arrests, the alleged leader of the religious organization publicly distanced the group from the suspects, stating they were not official members and did not represent the group's beliefs. However, investigators believe the accused were primarily motivated by their ideology. The accused viewed their actions as a mission to disrupt what they considered a system of injustice fueled by extremism and a misguided belief in their own correctness. On March 3, 2025, Veronica's mother filed a civil lawsuit for wrongful death. As of now, no verdict has been reached. The trial is still ongoing. The deaths of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly deeply shook the close-knit community of Hugoton and surrounding areas. Their loss sparked public outrage and intense sorrow within their families. Reports also surfaced that the judge overseeing the custody case had received threats, allegedly from individuals connected to the group. Authorities have since increased protection for all court officials involved. The trial for the accused has yet to begin, but the prosecution has already stated its intent to pursue the maximum penalty, either life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or capital punishment. What began as a family custody dispute has spiraled into a tragedy with religious and extremist undertones, leaving a lasting impact on the people of this small town. A bill was proposed to name a section of Highway 95 the Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly Memorial Drive. Veronica's family released memorial balloons on what would have been her 28th birthday. Juliana Carolina Ledesma, commonly known as Carolina to her friends and family, was born in 2001 in Fernandez, a town in Santiago del Estero, Argentina. She grew up in a modest yet loving household with her parents, Sonia Cruz and Carlos Ledesma. Since childhood, she has been known for her kindness, determination, and energetic personality. Her friends and neighbors admire her for her big dreams and generous heart. Sports play an important role in Carolina's life. She actively participated in local volleyball and football teams, where she forged lasting friendships. Academically, Carolina pursued studies in nursing assistance and computer science, with aspirations of becoming an office assistant. Beyond her career goals, she dreamed of one day getting married and starting a family. In 2019, at the age of 18, Carolina met Matias Soto during a football match. Matias came from a prominent family of local merchants who were well respected in the community. Their relationship developed quickly, and they soon became a couple. To be closer to Matias, Carolina returned to Fernandez from Bahia Blanca, where she had been staying with her brothers. However, when Matias first met Sonia, Carolina's mother, she had an uneasy feeling about him and believed that he wasn't the right match for her daughter. Despite this, the relationship progressed, and Carolina eventually moved in with Matias's family, staying there for nearly 2.5 years. Over time, cracks in their relationship became more evident, alarming those close to Carolina. Matias displayed concerning behavior, often described as controlling and possessive. Carolina began to distance herself from her social circle, which her close friend Antonella noticed. Matias avoided interacting with Carolina's friends and often isolated her from them during social gatherings. Tensions grew worse when they moved out of Matias's family home and into a house owned by Carolina's grandfather. Carolina and Matias attempted to run a business together, but most of the responsibilities fell on Carolina. According to her family, Matias slept late and controlled the finances, while Carolina was left to handle day-to-day tasks. Their relationship turned volatile, with frequent arguments and violent confrontations that occasionally required Carolina's parents to intervene. In August 2024, matters escalated to a dangerous degree. Matias held Carolina against her will for over 24 hours, destroyed parts of the house, and confiscated her phone to isolate her. Fearing for her safety, Carolina managed to escape and contacted her mother for help. Sonia rushed to her daughter's aid and demanded that Matias leave the house. Carolina returned to her parents' home for a brief period to recover. Despite her family urging her to file a formal complaint, Carolina chose not to pursue legal action. She eventually went back to her grandfather's house, believing Matthias had moved on, and she resolved to focus on her education and reclaim her independence. However, Matthias refused to give up on her. Matthias then began to stalk and harass Carolina relentlessly. He monitored her daily activities, showed up unexpectedly at her favorite places, and repeatedly called and texted her. When Carolina blocked his number, he switched to using different phone numbers and eventually sent emails, sometimes pleading for reconciliation, other times threatening to harm him. Despite the pressure, Carolina stood firm and refused to rekindle their relationship. Yet, Matthias's obsession became more dangerous. One day, he ambushed Carolina at her home, violently assaulting her by grabbing her hair, throwing her to the ground, and kicking her while threatening her life. In self-defense, Carolina struck him with a shovel. Matthias, manipulating the situation, accused her of trying to injure him and filed a police report against her. This prompted Carolina to finally file a formal complaint, detailing years of harassment and intimidation. Both parties submitted complaints, Matthias for alleged injuries and threats, and Carolina for harassment. Determined to move on, Carolina eventually met a new friend, Augustine Castillo, through social media. Augustine lived in Buenos Aires but frequently visited Santiago del Estero. The two met in person and even went on a vacation together. Carolina kept this relationship largely private but shared her wish to leave Fernandez permanently. She wished to start anew in Beltrán or Buenos Aires, seeking freedom from Matthias's influence. However, she never fully revealed the threats or stalking behavior to Augustine. Carolina's parents began noticing troubling changes in Matthias's behavior after learning about her new relationship. The situation escalated on Valentine's Day 2024 when Matthias contacted her from an unknown number, demanding they reconcile. When Carolina refused, he sent her private and intimate photos, threatening to share them with her family and friends if she didn't return to him. This act of blackmail, driven by jealousy and rejection, likely discouraged Carolina from reporting him for gender-based violence. Despite clear warning signs, neither Carolina nor her family believed Matthias would harm her. Tragically, they were wrong. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Carolina appeared happier. She was planning to visit Augustine in Buenos Aires on Tuesday, February 20th, with hopes of starting a new chapter in her life. On Friday, February 16th, she played a football match, scoring 8 goals, and celebrated with her team afterward. She spent Saturday playing more football and dedicated Sunday to volleyball. Throughout Sunday, Carolina stayed in constant contact with Augustine. She told him she was at her mother's house taking a shower and later went home around midnight. They spoke late into the night, discussing her upcoming trip and future plans. During their conversation, Carolina mentioned hearing dogs barking. Augustine reassured her, assuming it was nothing unusual. Their call ended around 2:30 a.m. The next morning, at 6:30 a.m., Augustine sent his usual good morning text but received no reply. By mid-morning, when she remained unresponsive, concerns began to grow, especially since Carolina had mentioned going to the university to register for new courses. His calls and messages remained unanswered. That same day, Carolina was supposed to have lunch with her parents, but she didn't show up. At first, Carolina's parents, Sonia and Carlos, weren't overly worried. They thought she might come back later. But as hours passed with no contact, their anxiety grew. Around 8 p.m., Sonia decided to check on her daughter. Using a spare key, Sonia entered Carolina's house, assuming she might be resting or had simply forgotten their plans. Instead, Sonia was met with a parent's worst nightmare. Carolina was lying lifeless in her bedroom. She was partially undressed, bruised, and had a bedsheet tightly tied around her neck. Sonia's screams alerted a firefighter neighbor, who immediately called the authorities. Within minutes, police and forensic teams arrived at the scene. Sonia was escorted back to her house to inform Carlos. In shock, Carlos rushed to his daughter's home, now a cordoned-off crime scene. Carolina's body was transferred to the local morgue for an autopsy as the investigation began. In subsequent media interviews, Carlos described the horror of finding his daughter and highlighted the abuse she had endured for months. Her death wasn't an unforeseeable tragedy, it stemmed from escalating violence, threats, and psychological abuse that had been underestimated by everyone around her. Carolina Ledesma, 22, dreamed of studying, working, finding love and starting her life over. But all those dreams were destroyed in one horrific act, the culmination of Matias' obsession and control. At approximately 10 p.m. on February 19, Augustine received a devastating phone call. Carolina's sister informed him that she had been murdered. Overwhelmed with grief, Augustine replayed their last conversation in his mind, haunted by her mention of the barking dogs. He couldn't stop thinking that the killer may have entered her home while they were still on the phone. Carolina's murder deeply shook the quiet town of Fernandez. Neighbors gathered at her house, overwhelmed with shock, offering condolences and support to her grieving family. Social media was flooded with tributes from friends, classmates, and teammates, all remembering Carolina for her warmth and aspirations. It didn't take long for suspicion to focus on Matias Loto, Carolina's ex-boyfriend. Family and friends recounted his recent threats and obsessive behavior. Investigators immediately began searching for Matias, but he had vanished. He had not returned to any familiar locations, and his family stated that they had not seen him since early Sunday morning, February 18, 2024. Carolina's grandfather, who is also her next-door neighbor, told investigators that he hadn't noticed anything unusual during the night of the incident. Ironically, on Monday morning, he walked into her home to turn off the lights, unaware that her body lay just a few feet away. Later, some neighbors mentioned seeing Matias drinking with friends near the neighborhood around 10 p.m. on Sunday. Carolina's grandfather speculated that Matias, possibly intoxicated, might have gone to Carolina's house, killed her, and fled on a motorcycle. There were rumors that the motorcycle Matias used might have belonged to Augustine, who had lent it to Carolina for errands. If true, this could explain how Matias recognized it and became enraged, although neither Carolina's family nor the authorities confirmed this theory. Carolina's mother, Sonia, spoke publicly about the abusive relationship between her daughter and Matias. She expressed regret over Carolina's reluctance to file formal complaints despite the abuse. Sonia sorrowfully said that if only her daughter had listened to her, maybe she would still be alive. The investigation was immediately directed to a gender violence prosecutor who ordered forensic examinations. An autopsy conducted the following day revealed that 22-year-old Carolina had died from mechanical asphyxiation caused by a bed sheet wrapped around her neck. The forensic report revealed horrifying details. Carolina had been brutally beaten before her death. She had suffered severe blows to her face, abdomen, groin, and legs, with defensive wounds on her arms. Skin found under her fingernails confirmed that she put up a struggle. Marks on the bed indicated that the killer had climbed on top of her to restrain her during the assault. Based on gathered evidence, authorities issued national and international arrest warrants for Matias Loto amid concerns he might try to flee the country. On the same day, Matias's motorbike was found abandoned about 320 kilometers from Fernandez, but he was completely missing without a trace. The manhunt intensified, but Matias remained elusive. In the days following Carolina's funeral, her family and friends held public demonstrations demanding justice, fearing Matias might be hiding in Fernandez with the help of relatives. Their calls for action grew louder as time passed without an arrest. Matias's parents claimed they had no idea where he was, and his mother even released emotional video pleas urging her son to surrender, acknowledging the suffering he had caused Carolina's family. As weeks turned into months, the search grew increasingly desperate. Officials considered several possibilities. Matias may have fled the province, been sheltered by relatives, or harmed himself. Over 140 people, including police cadets, rescue teams, and local officers, searched the remote area near where his motorcycle had been found, but there were no breakthroughs. By May 2024, 3 months after Carolina's murder, Matias was still on the run. Investigators conducted 15 raids across towns, including Fernandez, Buenos Aires, and other nearby provinces, seizing electronic devices in hopes of finding communication trails. Shockingly, they discovered that Matthias had used up to 7 different SIM cards to stalk and harass Carolina before her death, highlighting the extent of his obsession. Authorities warned that anyone helping him evade capture could face charges for aiding a fugitive. Meanwhile, Carolina's family attorney emphasized that if Matthias were found guilty, he would face charges of aggravated homicide, specifically femicide, due to the gender-based nature of the crime and their past relationship. On May 6, 2024, the case became more complicated when searchers in the rural area where the motorcycle had been abandoned discovered a human skull. Nearby, they found a shotgun, 3 shells, and personal belongings, including a wallet with identification, a phone, cash, house keys, and clothing consistent with what Matthias was last seen wearing. Among the items were a pair of sneakers, black and gray Bermuda shorts, and the remains of a beige t-shirt. Forensic experts and anthropologists expanded the search and found more skeletal remains scattered in the area, possibly moved by animals. The bones found included a femur, humerus, and finger bones. Preliminary analysis suggested the remains belonged to a young man between 22 and 27 years old. To confirm the identity, experts conducted DNA testing and dental comparisons. Forensic teams from Santiago del Estero and Catamarca collaborated on the investigation. Although the results were still pending, Matthias's parents identified the clothing and belongings as his. They confirmed the shotgun had once belonged to his grandfather. Matthias's mother later admitted she had feared the worst shortly after her son disappeared. While she and her husband prayed daily during his absence, their prayers were not for his freedom, but for him to be found alive and held accountable. Matthias's father blamed law enforcement for what he saw as a preventable tragedy, arguing that the pressure and scrutiny on their family pushed their son over the edge. Now, the family only wanted to bury him. The truth was confirmed 2 months later, on June 23, 2024, when DNA testing identified the remains as those of 22-year-old Matthias Lodo, the man accused of brutally murdering Carolina. Investigators reconstructed the events. In the early hours of Monday, February 19, Matthias went to Carolina's home on his motorcycle. He climbed over the fence and entered the house while she was asleep. He attacked her, and although she fought back with all her strength, he overpowered her and ultimately suffocated her with a bedsheet. It is unclear whether Matthias had the shotgun with him during the attack or retrieved it later, but after the murder, he fled to the remote wooded area and likely ended his own life. Matthias's death brought no closure, only more pain. Carolina's family, seeking justice and accountability, was left with unanswered questions and no trial. This tragic case shattered 2 families and left an entire community grieving. It ignited widespread discussions about family responsibility, the justice system's failings, and the unchecked escalation of a dangerous relationship. Some blame Matthias's parents, accusing them of protecting him, while others believe he acted alone, driven by fear and desperation to avoid imprisonment. This case occurred in December 2024 in West Valley City, Utah. It's a story about a refugee family from Myanmar who thought they had finally found safety in America, only to have their lives ripped away by the very person who was supposed to protect them. We're talking about Buma, a 38-year-old mother who had fought through hell to build a better life for her children, 17-year-old Sha Ray, 11-year-old Bo Ray, 8-year-old Christina Ree, and 2-year-old Naima. Only one person survived this terrible event, and his survival story is truly amazing. But before we get to that, let's talk about Boo. Her story deserves to be told well. Boo belonged to the Karenni ethnic minority in Myanmar. The situation in Myanmar has been dire for decades. The Karenni people have suffered ethnic cleansing at the hands of their own government, including systematic persecution, violence, and displacement, forcing hundreds of thousands to leave their homes. Around a decade ago, Boo faced a difficult choice many parents must make. She had to decide whether to remain in Myanmar, where her children's lives might be in danger, or to risk everything and escape to an unknown future. Ultimately, she, her 42-year-old husband, Dae Ray, and their young children left Myanmar. Their journey to America was difficult and complex. They didn't just fly there directly. Instead, they first had to live in a refugee camp in Thailand. These camps are like huge, temporary cities where people are stuck for long periods, sometimes years, hoping to be relocated. Families live in very small, basic shelters. Food and supplies are limited, they rely entirely on charities for help. Life there is a constant struggle for survival. Bu was a determined woman. Despite arriving in the United States with few resources, she was determined to build a better life for her children, and she worked tirelessly to do so. Notably, Bu taught herself English. Consider the challenges she faced: a new country, a different culture, raising children, and yet she found the time to learn a new language well enough to communicate and work effectively. Her family says that in recent years, she became the main provider for her household, working tirelessly to support her growing family. Bu had a simple but strong dream: to own a home and live comfortably with her husband and their 4 children. She achieved it. After years of hardship and rebuilding their lives, Bu's family finally moved into their own home in West Valley City. Her relatives said they had become more successful than they ever could have imagined, considering the horrors they faced in their home country and the difficulties of the refugee camp. Their children were doing well in school, and the family felt like they were achieving the American dream. Sha Ray, in particular, was an outstanding student at Granger High School, maintaining a 3.9 GPA and qualifying for honors. He had already met the graduation requirements and planned to attend the University of Utah in the fall of 2025. Bo, Christina, all had perfect school attendance and were considered wonderful children who were well-liked in their community. They had built connections, too. The family regularly attended church and became good friends with the refugee host families who had helped them adjust to life in America. These friends said that whenever they visited the family, they felt nothing but pure love. However, the story takes a frustrating turn. On Saturday, December 14th, family members became worried because Bu wasn't answering her phone. Bu's relative explained that Bu usually returns calls very quickly, even within minutes. Her silence on Saturday was therefore alarming. Throughout the weekend, nobody could contact the family. Bu missed work, and the children didn't reply to messages. By Monday, December 16th, the family's concern had grown to the point where they contacted the police and requested a welfare check. Police arrived for the welfare check shortly after 11 p.m. on the same day. They were at the house for nearly an hour, checking around the outside, knocking, and looking through windows. They didn't see any clear signs of a problem or a crime that would allow them to legally enter the house, so they left. On Tuesday, December 17th, Bumet didn't come to work. Concerned, her family went to her house. In the garage, they found Shah, her 17-year-old stepson. He had been shot in the head and left there, possibly for 2 days or more, without medical care. His family considered his survival a miracle. They immediately called 911. When police arrived, they discovered a horrific scene. Upstairs, Bumet and her daughters, Christina and Nai, were dead in a bedroom, all shot. Downstairs in the living room, they found Bo dead from gunshot wounds. His father, Dae Ray, was also dead, and a handgun was found under Dae's abdomen. Police believe Dae killed his wife and 3 children, then shot himself. They suspect the handgun found near his body was used in all the shootings, but are awaiting ballistics confirmation. The biggest mystery is the lack of a clear motive. This is what makes the case so frustrating and bewildering. Shah was likely shot inside the house but managed to crawl to the garage before collapsing. He was in critical condition with a severe brain injury from the gunshot. There's no record of domestic violence in the home. Neighbors and friends reported seeing no warning signs. The only concern mentioned was that Dae had recently been seeking employment, suggesting potential financial strain. However, this doesn't seem to explain such extreme violence. Family and friends who visited the home just days before the murders reported a loving and happy atmosphere. There were no indications of danger, and the family appeared to be a close and loving unit that had overcome significant challenges together. What drove Day to such violence? He escaped violence with his family, worked hard with his wife to create a successful life in America, and saw his children flourish. How could he then choose to destroy everything they had built? After being found, Shaw was immediately taken to the hospital in critical condition and had emergency surgery for a serious brain injury. For days, his family didn't know if he would live. When he first woke up, he couldn't communicate, but he has steadily improved. His family shares updates on his amazing progress. He can't remember the night he was shot, which might be for the best, but his short-term and long-term memory have gotten much better. He can express his emotions, feelings, and needs. He's also made great strides in physical, occupational, and speech therapy. However, there have been challenges. Shaw has lost most of his vision due to the injury. He is mostly blind, but he can sometimes tell the difference between light and dark. Doctors don't know if or when his vision might return. But his family says that despite his incomprehensible loss, Shaw has told them he feels hopeful about the future. Shaw was then transferred out of the trauma unit and into a standard ward. He is expected to be discharged soon and will live with his aunt, uncle, and cousins. Even after all he has endured, Shaw still intends to go to the University of Utah. Before his accident, he had already met all the requirements to graduate high school. He remains committed to his education and future goals. While recovering, he will probably attend the Utah schools for the deaf and the blind. His family has set up a GoFundMe to help with his medical expenses and college costs, and the community response has been incredible. They've raised over $60,000 so far to support his recovery and education. Boo and her family survived violence and ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, living in refugee camps before settling in the United States to build a better future. Through tireless efforts, Boo learned English, found work, provided for her family, and bought a home, realizing the American dream. Her children excelled in school, were well liked by teachers and peers, and integrated well through their church community and genuine friendships. However, tragedy struck when Boo's husband, Day, destroyed it all with a horrific act of violence, taking the lives of her and their children. The extended family's statement truly reflects the tragedy of this situation. They expressed their strong condemnation of all abuse and violence, particularly against vulnerable women and children. They are assisting the police in their investigation to determine the reasons behind these violent acts. While the person responsible for these terrible acts is now dead, they believe ultimate justice will be served. This case tragically illustrates that domestic violence can occur in any family, regardless of appearances. Despite the absence of prior police involvement, domestic disturbance reports, or noticeable warning signs, a man made the destructive decision to harm his family instead of confronting his personal struggles. It's also a reminder of how precarious life can be for refugee families. Boo thought she had finally found safety for her children in America, but the violence that took her life didn't come from the government persecution she fled. It came from within her own home. Shaw is recovering with strong community support. Granger High School and many individuals are helping him rebuild his life. The Utah refugee community is also supporting him and remembering his family. On December 21st, Shaw's 18th birthday, a celebration of life was held for Boo, Bo, Christina, and Nayai at a local church. Shaw attended, surrounded by family and community members who are dedicated to helping him. This case has drawn attention to Utah's Myanmar refugee community. The Utah Refugee Center reports that approximately 1,470 refugees from Myanmar have resettled in Utah since 2010. These refugees include people from various ethnic groups, such as the Karen, Rohingya, Chin, and Karenni, like the family of Boo. Many of these families are still recovering from the trauma of the violence they escaped in Myanmar. This recent tragedy has been especially painful for the Karenni community. The community's response has been deeply touching. Neighbors have placed candles and flowers at the family's home. Even those who didn't know the family have donated to Shaw's GoFundMe campaign. Refugee resettlement organizations are using this event to emphasize the ongoing challenges faced by refugee families and the need for continued community assistance. The family has asked for privacy as they grieve and plan celebrations of life for the victims. They've also directed people to resources like the Utah Domestic Violence Link Line for anyone experiencing abuse, and the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline for anyone at risk of self-harm. Day stole opportunities from his children, destroying their futures and aspirations. He destroyed Shaw's family, forcing him to start over. Despite his losses, injuries, and disabilities, he is choosing to be hopeful rather than give up. He's committed to finishing his education, rebuilding his life, and honoring his family by achieving the goals his mother had for her children. Bu demonstrated her strength when she escaped Myanmar and started a new life for her family in America. Now, Shaw is showing the same strength as he heals from this trauma and tries to create a future for himself. Bu, Bo, Christina, and Nye deserved better. They deserved to live long and happy lives in the safe home that Bu worked so hard to build for them. Perhaps we can best honor Bu's memory by supporting her son as he strives for the dreams she had for her children. We can also honor her legacy by supporting other refugee families seeking safety and a better life. Finally, we can honor them all by remembering that violence is never the solution, that there are always alternatives, and that seeking help is always preferable to causing harm. Phoenix, Arizona, USA, while often seen as a dry wasteland, actually has a long system of canals with dedicated bike paths. Locals often use these paths for recreation, cycling, and daily commuting. However, there was a time when a series of scary events occurred here, giving the area a bad reputation. On November 8, 1992, 22-year-old Angela Brasso, who had recently moved to Phoenix, decided to take advantage of the pleasant weather with a bike ride for some exercise. Angela was an active, goal-oriented young woman who routinely stayed fit by biking or running. She lived with her boyfriend, Joe, and was settling into her new life in the city. That evening, around 7 p.m., Angela left their apartment while Joe stayed behind, planning to bake her a special anniversary cake. Her bike rides usually lasted less than an hour, but this time, she did not return. As hours passed, Joe grew increasingly anxious. With cell phones not yet in widespread use in 1992, he had no way to contact her. Knowing her usual route, Joe got on his own bike and searched the paths himself, but he found no trace of her. He repeated the search 3 times that night, calling Angela's friends and family from his home phone in between. By the early hours of the morning, with no sign of Angela, he was forced to stop searching, though he could not sleep. Clinging to hope, he told himself she might simply have been delayed by meeting someone and would return soon. At daybreak, Joe reported Angela missing to the police, providing details of her bike route. Officers began their investigation, and less than a kilometer from her starting point, they discovered a large pool of blood. Bloodstains trailed toward the canal, where they found a mutilated body near the water's edge. Horrifyingly, the body was decapitated. Despite a thorough search, her head was missing, and her purple mountain bike was nowhere to be found. After 10 days of frantic searching, a local fisherman made a shocking discovery. While boating near a section of the canal not far from where Angela's body had been found, he noticed something unusual lodged in a drain grate. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a human head, later confirmed to belong to Angela. To the investigators' surprise, Angela's head was remarkably well preserved despite having been in the water for 10 days, almost as if it had been frozen. This strange condition puzzled detectives and complicated the investigation. Although Angela's head had been recovered, along with the rest of her body, no substantial evidence or leads emerged to point to a suspect. The case quickly stalled. As is often the case in tragedies of this nature, suspicion turned to Joe, the last person to see Angela alive. Detectives explored several potential scenarios involving him, including the possibility of an argument that had escalated into violence, suspicions of infidelity, or even an unwanted pregnancy leading to rage. However, there was no evidence to support these theories, and Joe was eventually ruled out as a suspect. With no solid clues, the case reached a dead end. For 10 months, Angela's murder remained unresolved, until another gruesome incident reignited fear in the community. On September 21, 1993, 17-year-old Melanie Burns vanished. That night, Melanie's mother returned home from dinner to find her daughter had missed curfew. She also noticed that Melanie's bicycle was missing, suggesting she had gone for one of her frequent walks along the canal, even at the late hour. Initially annoyed, Melanie's mother assumed she would return soon and decided not to search right away. But by 10:30 p.m., Melanie still hadn't come home, and her mother grew increasingly worried. Frantic, she began reaching out to Melanie's friends, including her best friend, but none had seen her. Her disappearance was uncharacteristic. She was not known to run away, and she always informed her parents of her plans. Melanie had never taken a walk so late at night, as she preferred walking during the day. Although concerned, her mother decided not to search near the canal that night, hoping she would eventually return on her own. Unfortunately, Melanie never came back, and by the next morning, her mother reported her missing to the police. One morning, a local woman named Charlotte was riding her bicycle along the canal. Her young daughter sat in a small seat attached above the bike's rear wheel. As she passed a section of the path, Charlotte noticed a large, dark puddle on the ground. Riding through it, she felt drops splatter on her and quickly realized it wasn't water, but a thick, dark liquid. Alarmed, she turned back to inspect it and made a horrifying discovery: it was a pool of blood. She also noticed drag marks leading away from the path but didn't investigate further. Shaken, Charlotte rushed home and contacted the police to report what she had found. Authorities arrived and made a grim discovery in the nearby water: a young girl's body, clad in a blue bathing suit. She had been fatally stabbed in the back and abused, just like Angela Brasso, a recent victim. That evening, during a press conference, the police confirmed the body was found near the location of Angela's murder. Meanwhile, Melanie's mother held on to hope that the victim wasn't her missing daughter. Despite having no updates about Melanie, she convinced herself her daughter was safe and went to bed. However, the next morning, Melanie's friends arrived at her door with devastating news: Melanie had been killed. Police were still actively working at the crime scene. Investigators reconstructed the incidents with the aid of forensic reports, which led to chilling conclusions. In both cases, the murderer had ambushed the victims from behind. He likely forced Angela and Melanie off their bikes, either by knocking them over while they were riding or distracting them with a question. Both Angela and Melanie were fatally stabbed in the back, then abused and murdered. Angela's body had been dismembered, with the killer attempting to horrifically cut her in half. It's possible Melanie's body was going to suffer a similar fate but was abandoned in the water before the assailant could complete his gruesome plan. One critical breakthrough was a DNA sample left by the attacker, collected from the crime scenes. However, DNA technology in the early 1990s was limited and provided few leads. No matches were found in existing criminal databases. However, DNA analysis of the collected evidence revealed a 100% match between the two victims, Angela and Melanie, confirming they were both killed by the same person, a serial killer. Their stab wounds were so precise that investigators suspected the killer might be a doctor, surgeon, or someone knowledgeable in anatomy. The crimes shocked the Phoenix community, causing widespread fear. Parents became terrified of letting their children play outside or near the canal, and cycling in the area was deemed dangerous. The two heinous murders gripped the city with panic for over 2 decades. Despite the community's vigilance and consistent media coverage, investigators made no progress as days turned into weeks, months, and eventually years. The trail went cold, and no new crimes were linked to the killer. Over 20 years later, advancements in DNA technology offered fresh hope. During a genetics conference in California, experts discussed how genealogy could impact forensic science, including new techniques for identifying suspects through family ties. A company representative suggested analyzing the DNA evidence from Angela and Melanie's cases using genealogical databases, sparking immediate interest. Investigators sent the stored DNA evidence to specialized labs for testing. Soon, 6 matches under the surname Miller appeared in public family databases. While Miller was a common name in the United States, the development provided the most significant lead in years. Detective Schwartzko, now handling the case, began tracing this connection. At last, a new path in the investigation seemed possible. Detective Schwartzko conducted a search of Phoenix databases and discovered approximately 600 individuals of interest in the area. Reviewing each profile took significant time. Toward the end of the list, the team came across a man named Brian Patrick Miller, whose criminal background made him a prime suspect. In 2014, Brian was 42 years old and still residing in Phoenix. His history was particularly troubling. Long before the murders of 2 Canadian women in May of 1989, Brian had already drawn the attention of law enforcement. At just 16 years old, he committed a shocking crime. At the time, a 24-year-old woman named Celeste Bentley was on her way to work. She unknowingly shared a bus ride with Brian, a stranger who happened to get off at the same stop. As she walked toward the store where she worked as a saleswoman, Brian suddenly attacked her from behind, injuring her and then fleeing the scene. Initially, Celeste thought she'd been punched, but after touching her back, she discovered blood on her hands. Terrified, she screamed and managed to reach her workplace, where a colleague called for help. Fortunately, she was not seriously injured and was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance within 30 minutes. That same day, police informed her that a suspect had been arrested. She identified Brian, who was subsequently charged with aggravated assault. Doctors treating Celeste explained that if Brian's attack had been stronger, her injuries could have been fatal. Brian was found guilty and sentenced to juvenile detention, where he remained until the age of 18. Brian's troubled life began in Hawaii. His father passed away in a motorcycle accident when he was still a preschooler. Several years later, Brian and his mother, Helen, moved to Phoenix, where she worked tirelessly to provide for them. Often left unattended, Brian began displaying disturbing behavior. Unbeknownst to Helen, her son harbored a dark side. While Brian was incarcerated, Helen discovered his diary. Within its pages, he described a horrifying plan to kidnap a girl, bind her, and dispose of her body. Horrified, Helen brought the diary to the Phoenix police and told them that she no longer wanted her son to live with her. As a result, after he was released from prison, Brian was sent to a specialized group home. Decades later, during the 2014 murder investigation, detectives revisited the archived diary. Its gruesome entries bore striking similarities to the murders of Angela and Melanie. Brian had described methods such as disposing of bodies, preserving a victim's head, attacking from behind in secluded areas, and inflicting fatal knife wounds to the back. These haunting details solidified Brian as the primary suspect in the 2 murders in December 2014. Tracking Brian down was not difficult. He was still living in Phoenix and had become somewhat of a local celebrity, known as the Zombie Hunter. He frequently participated in parades and festivals dressed in a steampunk-inspired costume, featuring a long coat, glasses, a mask, and a large fake Gatling gun. He also owned an old police car customized with chains, blood splatters, spikes, and the word Zombie Hunter painted on the sides. This alter ego, which portrayed him as a hero fighting evil, earned him a significant fan following, even among police officers. At events, fans often lined up to take photos with him. However, the question remained, could Brian, this seemingly quiet man who played the role of a hero, actually be the killer responsible for the deaths of 2 young women, Angela and Melanie? To confirm their suspicions, investigators needed a DNA sample. Detectives began closely monitoring Brian, who at the time worked at an Amazon warehouse. Every day, he parked his customized zombie mobile in the same spot and spent his breaks sitting inside, listening to loud music. During one of his breaks, a detective approached him under the guise of offering him a job. The detective posed as a security consultant, claiming he owned a warehouse frequently targeted by thieves and needed a security guard. He offered Brian a well-paying position, and Brian seemed to believe the cover story. On January 2, 2015, the detective arranged to meet Brian at a nearby restaurant to complete a job application and discuss the role further. Members of the cold case investigation team also visited the restaurant, blending in as ordinary customers while discreetly observing Brian. They reserved a separate area and staged a small lunch. To ensure they didn't compromise any potential evidence, they asked the restaurant staff to disinfect the dishes thoroughly and handle everything with gloves to preserve any DNA left behind. Brian arrived at the restaurant with his 15-year-old daughter, Sarah Miller. He was a single father and, by all accounts, a polite and caring parent who often brought Sarah along on his outings. Detectives noted how much Sarah admired her father. During the meeting, they ordered burgers, hoping Brian would drink water and leave a DNA sample in the glass. However, Brian ate his food without touching his drink for most of the meal, making the detectives worry their plan would fail. Finally, as the meeting was about to end, Brian took a single sip, leaving enough saliva on the glass for forensic analysis. Though detectives obtained the DNA sample, they were initially doubtful that Brian could be the brutal killer they were searching for. His image as a doting and decent father seemed at odds with the violent individual responsible for the murders of Angela and Melanie. Nonetheless, the glass was sent to the lab for testing, and investigators revisited the case files in case they had missed something. 11 days later, a forensic expert contacted the detective. The DNA sample was a 100% match. After more than 20 years with no leads, the police had definitive evidence linking Brian to the murders of Angela and Melanie. Armed with this evidence, police moved to arrest Brian Patrick Miller. When officers informed him of the charges, Brian's legs buckled, and he appeared bewildered, repeatedly claiming he had never hurt anyone. Despite his protests, the police had probable cause to detain him and a warrant to search the home he shared with his mother. Upon entering, officers were shocked to discover Brian's home was severely cluttered. He was a hoarder, and every space was filled with piles of items, leaving only narrow paths to navigate. Searching through the massive accumulation of items seemed overwhelming, but eventually, they uncovered incriminating evidence, including the bicycles that belonged to the murdered girls, Angela and Melanie. In January 2015, when Angela and Melanie's families learned that Brian had been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, they finally felt some relief after decades of uncertainty. To gather more information about Brian's past, detectives reached out to his ex-wife, Emmy. Emmy revealed that she had been married to Brian for 8 years, after meeting him in 1996 when she was 19. They quickly married and moved to Everett, Washington. During their marriage, Brian made a chilling confession to Emmy, admitting that he had killed a girl in Phoenix years before they met. Emmy said she did not report the incident to the police because she wanted to be a supportive wife and because she was too afraid of his temper. The strange thing was that the case Brian told her about did not match Angela and Melanie's. According to Emmy, Brian told her that he had randomly encountered a schoolgirl, brought her to his home, killed her, and disposed of her remains. Detectives reviewed the information and discovered similarities between this case and the disappearance of 13-year-old Brandy Myers, another unsolved crime in Phoenix. Brandy had been going door to door in the North Road area of Phoenix on May 26, 1992, collecting money for charity when she vanished. This occurred 6 months before Angela's murder. Family members reconstructed events and revealed that Brian had been living in a hostel near Brandy's home after being released from prison. The route Brandy took to and from school would have brought her past Brian's residence regularly. On the day she disappeared, she planned to visit several houses to collect donations but never returned home. Despite extensive searches, her body was never located. According to Brian's ex-wife Emmy, he admitted to killing Brandy, disposing of her body, and discarding the remains in a landfill. However, when detectives questioned Brian about Brandy, he denied any involvement. This wasn't the end of Brian's violent actions. In 2002, a woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez encountered Brian while walking alone late at night in Everett. Brian offered her a ride, and she accepted but asked to make a call. He offered to take her to his workplace to use the phone. Once there, Brian attacked her with a large serrated kitchen knife, stabbing her in the back. Despite her injuries, Melissa managed to fight back, escape, and report the assault to the police. Brian claimed Melissa had attacked him and that he acted in self-defense, but he was arrested and charged with first-degree assault with a deadly weapon. Brian was jailed from May to December 2002. During this time, he appealed his conviction. At a new trial, the jury did not believe Melissa's account, and Brian was acquitted and released. According to Emmy, while in prison, Brian began sending her disturbing letters, initially professing his innocence but eventually detailing violent intimate fantasies he planned to act out against her upon his release. After his return, Brian's behavior took a darker turn. He started holding a knife to Emmy's throat during intimate moments, restraining her, and physically assaulting her. This abusive behavior led to their divorce, but Brian retained primary custody of their daughter. Despite his violence towards his wife, he was described as a loving and attentive father. In October 2022, Brian's trial began for the murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas. His lawyer did not contest that he committed the murders but argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. Brian blamed his actions on the abuse he suffered after his father's death, particularly at the hands of his mother. He claimed this abuse made him hate women and contributed to his lifelong mental health issues. Since his mother had died in 2010, these claims were difficult to confirm. Brian's defense team asserted that he endured severe psychological and physical abuse starting at age 5. His mother reportedly beat him with a belt featuring a steel buckle and inflicted severe punishments for minor offenses. Brian also claimed that she subjected him to abuse by tying him up and beating him. The defense argued that this history of abuse caused Brian to develop severe mental illnesses, including dissociative identity disorder. Psychiatrist Bethany Brand testified that Brian suffered from dissociative amnesia, a condition causing him to commit violent acts without recalling them afterward. The prosecution relied heavily on the testimony of Brian's ex-wife, Emmy, who described the horrific abuse she endured during their marriage. She provided chilling details about their life together, including her fear of saying no to him due to his violent behavior. She also reported that Brian had confessed to murdering Brandy Myers. However, without Brandy's remains, there was insufficient evidence to pursue charges for her disappearance, and the case remained unresolved. 6 months after the trial began, the court found Brian Patrick Miller guilty of murdering Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas. He showed no reaction or emotion upon hearing the guilty verdict. However, during his final statement, he expressed regret, acknowledging the pain the victims' families must be enduring. He attributed his actions to his mother's influence and asked for forgiveness. The judge then sentenced Brian to death. Under Arizona law, Brian had the right to appeal the sentence. 8 months later, during the retrial, his lawyers successfully argued that his mother's abusive behavior during his childhood was a significant mitigating circumstance. This argument spared him from the death penalty. The judge ultimately sentenced Brian to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case shocked the local community, as no one had suspected that the well-known zombie hunter could be responsible for such heinous crimes. However, DNA evidence presented during the trial proved to be undeniable. On June 19, 2021, in Italy's Brescia province, the highly anticipated summer car race, Mille Miglia, began. Cars started their journey on June 17, crossing half the country to reach Rome. As the participants made their way through Salo, tens of thousands of tourists lined the coast, enjoying the picturesque views of Lake Garda. With boats anchored along the shore, the race was set to continue the next day. And in the evening, people relaxed and celebrated, enjoying the city's nightlife. As dawn broke, the festive atmosphere suddenly turned tense. Journalists had gathered to cover the race when they noticed a boat drifting near Partes on Lake Garda. Upon closer inspection, they realized the vessel was severely damaged, as if it had hit rocks. Yet it remained afloat. When the boat was washed ashore, a dead man was found inside, curled in a fetal position and wearing a blue shirt, with dried blood everywhere. The scene resembled a horror movie. Along with his belongings, A woman's handbag was discovered on the boat, raising suspicions that he might not have been alone. Around the same time, a man named Enzo Garzarella visited the police station in Salo to report his son, Umberto Garzarella, missing. Umberto had left home the night before to watch the race and take a boat ride with his girlfriend. Although Umberto often went on such trips, they were usually brief, and he avoided sailing at night because of safety concerns. When Enzo noticed his son was missing for an unusually long time, he attempted to call him multiple times, growing increasingly worried when his son didn't answer. The Carabinieri were already aware of the found body in a wrecked boat on Lake Garda and brought Enzo to the scene for identification. Upon seeing his son Umberto's feet protruding from under a white sheet on the beach, Enzo immediately recognized him and fell to his knees, crying. Umberto, 37 at the time of his death, was well known in Salo as the owner of a company established by his father in 1996, specializing in servicing water heating boilers. He was a kind, tall and energetic man who loved sailing. Tragically, this was not the only distressing news that morning. Just a few kilometers away, another family was anxiously awaiting the return of their daughter, Greta Nedrotti, a 25-year-old economics student. She had also failed to come home after an evening walk on June 19, 2021. The last contact her parents had with her was that night, and from then on, her phone went unanswered. They tried not to worry, believing that she was celebrating the races and enjoying time with her boyfriend. Her family became even more alarmed when they woke up early in the morning and still saw no sign of Greta. However, their concern grew when they woke up early in the morning and still had not seen any sign of her. The situation grew more urgent when the Carabinieri from Salo contacted Greta's family, informing her father that they had found a bag containing her ID card. They did not mention that it had been discovered on a severely damaged boat. While it was already known that Greta had been on the broken boat, her exact fate remained unclear, leading to a decision not to cause further alarm for her parents. Nonetheless, this lack of transparency did little to alleviate their concerns, and the entire family was in a state of panic, actively searching for Greta. Initially, the investigation suggested that some sort of collision had occurred, resulting in Greta ending up in the water. After checking all local medical facilities and confirming that Greta had not been admitted, authorities speculated that she might still be in the lake or that she had already drowned. A search and rescue operation was launched on the water, and diving teams spent about 12 hours searching the lake. Eventually, Greta's body was discovered at the bottom. The condition of her body indicated a severe accident, as her legs were partially amputated, and she had numerous cuts and other injuries throughout. Upon hearing this devastating news, Greta's parents were heartbroken. They had held on to hope, refusing to believe that Greta would never come home. Just the day before, she had been trying on beautiful dresses in her room for an evening event. She had recently started dating a popular boy named Umberto Garzarella. Greta was a vibrant and friendly young woman, dedicated not just to her family but also to her education and career. In a statement to journalists, her father recalled seeing her last as she sat on the living room couch, reading before hurriedly packing to leave. She had informed them she would return late that evening, but she never did. The loss of their only daughter was a profound shock for the family. When the news of Umberto and Greta's tragic deaths on the lake broke, local newspapers and news channels flooded the area. Continuous live broadcasts from the scene attracted interviews with locals who knew Umberto and were eager to share what a wonderful person he was. Greta's parents also spoke, highlighting their daughter's aspirations for a master's degree while working at an accounting firm. Those who knew her described her as intelligent and goal-oriented. Even Greta's ex-husband, with whom she had remained on friendly terms, spoke to the media. This revealed that Greta and Umberto were well-liked individuals, yet it did not clarify the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. Questions arose about what had occurred on the lake, and even law enforcement was puzzled. Initial theories suggested that Umberto might have consumed too much alcohol or fallen asleep at the helm, leading to the collision. However, Umberto was an experienced sailor and handled boats well, making this scenario seem unlikely. A blood alcohol test showed he had only consumed about 1 glass of wine that evening, which would not significantly impair his judgment. Additionally, the damage to the boat above the waterline was unusual, with the side of the vessel appearing sliced significantly along the hull. The police contacted the lake's Coast Guard, and experts concluded that the boat had likely collided with another vessel traveling at high speed. The force of impact kept Umberto's boat from sinking, and pieces of a different colored hull were found in the breach. These fragments likely belonged to another vessel involved in the incident. During witness interviews from the night of the 19th of June, police spoke with a man who provided the first clue that could help solve the case. He reported hearing a loud bang late at night and then saw a large object moving away from the lake's shore. Due to the darkness and distance, he did not realize a collision had occurred. But after the crash, one of the boats appeared to drift away. Noticing a long, jagged hole on the starboard side of a boat, police decided to follow up on a report made to the lake's Coast Guard the previous day. However, there had been no calls about collisions or accidents on the water. That same morning, the Coast Guard discovered a damaged motorboat, the Riva Super Aquarima, which had an estimated value of around 800,000 euros. At that moment, no one linked this boat to the deaths of Umberto and Greta. The Riva was moored at a small factory in Salo. Far from the race location, it was heavily damaged, particularly at the front, and wooden chips of a different color were found in its hull, likely from the second boat involved in the accident. A check confirmed that these parts matched components missing from Umberto's boat. The next step was to determine the owner of the damaged vessel. It turned out that the owner was Christian Theismann, a 50-year-old German tourist, who was vacationing at Lake Garda with his friend, 52 years old, Patrick Casson, also from Germany. Both men were high-ranking executives at major international companies who had come to Salau to enjoy the lake, watch the race, and relax. They were easily located at a hotel near the pier where the wrecked boat was found. They appeared confused when they were taken in for questioning. They seemed unaware of the situation and were clearly intoxicated, smelling strongly of alcohol. Language barriers complicated communication since they did not speak Italian, and the Carabinieri did not speak German. Despite the difficulties, detectives have managed to piece together the events that occurred that evening. Patrick and Christian recounted that they spent most of the day on their boat. They walked along the lake shore, observing the race, and stopped at various docks in Brescia to buy drinks and snacks. Later in the evening, they dined at a restaurant before boarding their boat again at 11:00 p.m. They believed that around 24 minutes later, they collided with Umberto's boat. However, their memories of the incident were vague, claiming they crashed into a large log without hearing any screams or seeing anyone, and then quickly returned to the pier at the hotel. Law enforcement agencies discovered surveillance cameras in the area and reviewed the footage, which captured the moments after a collision. Patrick and Christian did not stop to help Umberto and Greta. Instead, they sped towards the coast and docked near their hotel at 11:31 p.m. When Christian and Patrick got off their boat, CCTV footage showed them struggling to maintain their balance, clearly indicating they were very drunk. Patrick stumbled and fell onto the dock. The video clip of Patrick and Christian, who are suspected of wrongdoing, quickly went viral after it was leaked to the media. The release of the recording led to a public outcry within days. Local residents were furious with the behavior of the German tourists. Patrick and Christian, especially after learning that Christian had initially refused to take an alcohol test. Many believed he should have been tested since it was evident from the footage that he was barely able to stand. Eventually, Christian was convinced to take the test, which revealed a blood alcohol level of 0.29 part per million, even 14 hours after his detention. This indicated that he had been extremely impaired at the time of the accident and likely unable to comprehend the situation. It is worth noting that, when speaking with the Carabinieri, Patrick and Christian were irritable, insisting they had done nothing wrong and that they were being held unlawfully. They believed they had hit a log, which is why they didn't stop and return to shore before their boat sank. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage did not capture the speed of the men's boat. This sparked further discussions. While there were disagreements about the exact speed, many believed the boat was traveling faster than 30 kilometers per hour. This was supported not only by the damage to Umberto's boat but also by Greta's injuries. Coast Guard experts stated that Christian's boat was moving at a speed of at least 40 kilometers per hour, significantly exceeding the allowed speed limit in the dark. Still unclear about the situation, Patrick and Christian hired lawyers. It is worth noting that, until that moment, they had not fully understood that their actions had resulted in the deaths of Umberto and Greta, largely due to a language barrier. Once they understood the seriousness of the incident, they became noticeably calmer. Preliminary hearings took place, after which Patrick and Christian were sent back to their home city of München. They were instructed to stay there until the trial commenced. This decision shocked the families of Umberto and Greta, as the two murderers were allowed to return home after signing written agreements not to leave. They carried on with their normal lives, seemingly unaffected. While waiting for the judge to set a trial date, from the outset, both Patrick and Christian had been listed as suspects for manslaughter and for failing to assist victims Umberto and Greta. This charge carried a relatively light sentence, with potential penalties of less than 10 years for the two lives they took. The trial was expected to be challenging, primarily because it was difficult to determine which man was operating the boat during the collision. Both Patrick and Christian claimed to have no recollection of the event. Detectives aimed to clarify this and other elements of the incident by gathering more evidence prior to the trial. Relying heavily on camera footage, the public reacted negatively to the decision to permit Patrick and Christian to return home, viewing it as an attempt to evade punishment and responsibility. Umberto's family and Greta's family felt that this leniency was facilitated by Patrick and Christian's wealth and connections, and they believed the suspects prioritized their freedom and reputations over the victims' lives. Moreover, the families were understandably worried that the suspects could escape justice. 2 weeks after the tragedy, Christian and Patrick sent letters of apology to Greta's parents and Umberto's parents. However, the families rejected these letters, which were printed rather than handwritten and bore no signatures. They viewed this gesture as insincere. This response was particularly upsetting given the horrific circumstances surrounding Umberto and Greta's deaths. Umberto died instantly from the force of the impact, while Greta suffered severe injuries, including multiple fractures from being struck. Initially, it was believed that Greta had drowned after being thrown from the boat due to the collision. However, the actual circumstances were even more tragic. The families mourned the loss of their children, burying them in their hometowns just days apart. In remembrance, they released hundreds of white balloons into the sky. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation, searching for information to determine who was driving the boat at the time of the accident. They gathered CCTV footage and interviewed witnesses. Eventually, they managed to obtain footage from a villa overlooking the lake in Port Sea that captured the collision. While the recording was grainy, it revealed important details. Clearly, the boat involved belonged to Patrick and Christian, and it collided with Umberto and Greta's boat. This footage clarified the circumstances of Greta's death, showing that she had not been thrown from the boat. She remained inside during the impact. After the collision, Patrick and Christian's boat was seen moving away from the damaged vessel. Moments later, something small fell into the water, resembling Greta's dress, and bloodstains were found on the boat's hull, initially thought to belong to Umberto. It seems that Greta was in a state of panic. She crawled over the side of the boat and jumped into the water, trying to swim to shore to save herself. However, due to the extent of her injuries, her legs were cut up. She struggled to swim and ultimately drowned. By September 2021, the prosecutor's office determined that Patrick was the one driving the boat, which belonged to his friend Christian. This meant Christian also held some responsibility for letting an untrained and intoxicated person operate his property. On July 5, Patrick went to the city prosecutor's office to surrender voluntarily, He wanted to avoid arousing too much attention and being taken into custody from his home in handcuffs. As he was concerned about the potential impact on his family, he confirmed that he was driving the boat, which resulted in a list of charges against him: 2 counts of manslaughter, failing to assist in a rescue, and operating a vessel while drunk, all of which contributed to the lake accident. Investigators had thoroughly reconstructed the events of that evening, revealing a picture of reckless behavior and excessive alcohol use. After the collision involving Umberto and Greta, the boat was tied to the shore, and Patrick and Christian did not return to their hotel. Instead, they went to another bar. They sustained only minor injuries, and when they were picked up the next morning, no serious injuries were reported. They failed to contact emergency services, even anonymously. Witnesses noted that 2 very intoxicated men who spoke German entered the bar. Struggling to form coherent sentences, one man hit his head on a wooden pillar and felt nauseous but refused assistance. By the end of September, the court announced that hearings would begin in November, during which time Patrick was held in custody. Meanwhile, the families of Umberto and Greta had received financial compensation from the insurance companies of Patrick and Christian. Prior to that, they sought justice for their loved ones, attending the hearings in support of their children. When Patrick finally took the stand, he personally apologized to the families of Umberto and Greta for the first time since the incident, asserting that they were unaware of the accident due to their drunkenness. However, this explanation sounded insincere. As of December 19, the hearings were still ongoing. For Umberto's parents, this date was particularly difficult because it marked what would have been their son's 38th birthday. Umberto's father approached Christian, urging him to take action to honor both Umberto and Greta. The next day, Christian unexpectedly visited Umberto's gravesite, where he apologized once again and shared his plans for a charity project aimed at supporting families affected by accidents. Patrick remained involved in the hearings, with his lawyer working to reduce his culpability. Initially, the lawyer disputed Patrick's level of intoxication, arguing that it was unprovable how much he had drunk before getting on the boat. An independent expert was hired to challenge the Coast Guard's conclusion that the boat was traveling over 40 kilometers per hour, claiming instead that it was going no faster than 10 kilometers per hour. Then events took a bizarre turn. The defense attempted to shift blame onto Umberto for not taking the necessary actions to avoid the boat. The lawyer accused Umberto of being negligent and violating maritime regulations. He also suggested that Greta may have failed to comply with safety regulations, as she was allegedly standing in the position where the collision occurred. Upon hearing this absurd defense, Umberto's father left the courtroom in frustration. Christian's lawyer even claimed that Christian was asleep while the boat was moving, implying he could not control Patrick's actions. In March 2022, a lengthy trial was concluding. Prosecutors sought a 5-year prison sentence for Patrick Casson and 5 years for his friend Christian Theismann. However, the court only accepted part of these claims. Patrick, who had been driving the boat, was sentenced to 5 years, and Christian received a sentence of 2 years and 6 months. The court's decision focused solely on the manslaughter charge and did not consider their failure to assist the victims, Umberto and Greta. This shows that their irresponsibility was overlooked, as their testimony that they thought they had hit a large log was accepted without any doubt. By May, the appellate court upheld the sentences, which then took effect. Families of Umberto and Greta, along with concerned citizens, expressed their outrage at the court's leniency, especially regarding who was actually steering the boat. Surveillance footage revealed that when the 2 men departed from shore, it was Christian, the boat owner, who was in control, not Patrick. Friends of Patrick and Christian stated that the owner, Christian, rarely allowed anyone else to steer the boat. This raised important questions about who was at the helm and whether Patrick and Christian had switched places. Umberto and Greta's families attempted to challenge this point but were unsuccessful. The only course of action left for them was to advocate for a change in the law to ensure stricter penalties for such incidents. Consequently, A petition was launched to equate water-related accidents with those occurring on roads. On September 20, 2023, the Chamber of Deputies approved the bill after gathering 100,000 signatures. It passed with 288 votes in favor and only one against. This amendment to the criminal code is informally named after Umberto and Greta. Thanks to this initiative, penalties for causing death in a water accident can now range from 2 to 18 years in prison, while penalties for causing bodily harm can go up to 7 years. Kelly was born on August 1, 1982, in Elmira, New York. She was the youngest of Elizabeth Stage and Howard Stage's 3 children. Her father, Howard, was well regarded in the community. Having been the chief of the West Elmira Volunteer Fire Department for many years, Kelly's older sister, Kim Bourgeois, who was 10 years older, it was very protective of her. Kim felt like a second mother to Kelly, describing her as very brave, sassy. Kelly enjoyed dancing and was very beautiful. She had the potential to be a model. That was her aspiration. Kelly had a vibrant personality and big ambitions. This led her to leave her teaching job and move from her hometown to Las Vegas. There, she became a cocktail waitress. She loved her new life, enjoying the glamour and wearing extravagant costumes. Kim recalled how much Kelly enjoyed the fast-paced and exciting atmosphere of Las Vegas, even wearing a 30-pound feather headdress to work. Then, Kelly returned to Elmira because she was drawn to Thomas Clayton, a well-known hockey player for the Elmira Jackals. Clayton had a reputation both for his performance in the semi-professional league and his behavior outside of it. Kim later said that people admired him because he was attractive, a troublemaker, which many found captivating. Thomas was from Binghamton, New York, and studied at Niagara University, where he played ice hockey. He then joined the Elmira Jackals and played forward for 4 seasons, from 1998 to 2002. During this time, he became a popular figure in the small town due to his charm and athletic ability. However, his reputation was also affected by his reckless behavior and numerous relationships with different women. Kelly and Thomas were instantly attracted to each other when they met at a hockey game while she was visiting home for Christmas. Even though Thomas was known for being reckless and having a bad reputation, Kelly was captivated by his charm and popularity. Their connection was so strong that Kelly quickly decided to give up her thrilling life in Las Vegas and move to New York to begin a new chapter with Thomas. They married within a year of meeting. Kelly changed her last name to Clayton, her husband's last name. They settled in Caton, New York, to start their life together. Everyone thought they were deeply in love and had found something special. After an injury ended Thomas's hockey-playing days, he shifted his career focus and became the owner of a water and fire damage restoration franchise called Paul Davis Emergency Services of the Southern Tier. He later became a project manager at Serve Pro, a similar franchise owned by his close friend Brian Lang. Thomas seemed dedicated to building a successful business and providing for his growing family. Kelly Clayton embraced her new role as a wife and mother while also working as a waitress at the Woodhouse Stadium Grill in Corning. Their first child, Charlie Emma, was born in 2008, followed by their son, Cullen, a few years later. To outsiders, the Clayton family appeared perfect. Kelly balanced caring for their 2 children with her job, and Thomas ran his business successfully. They were busy, but seemed like a happy family of 4. However, their marriage was starting to show signs of trouble. Thomas had become a gambler and openly carried a lot of cash. The couple kept cash in 2 safes at home, and Thomas frequently took large sums to casinos for high-stakes poker. His gambling was becoming a serious problem. Once, he even lent his car to a friend's sister, while unaware that $22,000 was in the trunk. As Thomas and Kelly's marriage went on, Thomas's unhappiness and restlessness became obvious to their friends and family. Kelly was dedicated to their family and marriage, but Thomas seemed emotionally detached. He started having affairs. During these affairs, Thomas often complained to the other women about Kelly, calling her lazy and saying he wanted to leave her. However, he always told them he couldn't divorce her because she would take everything. This suggests that Thomas wanted to end the marriage but didn't want to pay for a divorce. About a year before Kelly's death, a major warning sign appeared. Thomas doubled her life insurance policy from $500,000 to $1 million. This large increase, along with his affairs and complaints, suggested he was planning something terrible. Thomas mistreated his employees. He would often keep them in debt to him, using tactics such as giving them loans, extra work. Michael Beard was one such employee. Thomas seemed to use this debt to control his employees, making them dependent on him. Michael had worked for Thomas at Thomas's businesses and at ServPro, a company owned by Thomas's friend, Brian Lang. Because of this, Michael knew the Clayton family's home well, including its layout. He had worked there many times and had been trusted to enter their private areas. However, Michael was fired from ServPro just 12 days before Kelly Clayton's murder. He was fired because of complaints about drinking, banned substance use, and stealing from clients' homes. This left him in financial difficulty. He couldn't pay rent to Thomas for his apartment, and he didn't have a car or a driver's license, making his situation even worse. After firing Michael, Thomas seems to help him by suggesting job opportunities and buying him a bicycle. During the next 12 days, they spoke on the phone often, a detail that became important later in the trial, thanks to cell phone records. Although it looked like Thomas was simply helping a former employee who was struggling, the prosecution argued that he was actually exploiting Michael's financial hardship to pressure him into committing murder. On September 28, 2015, Thomas and Luc Tetrol, an employee, switched trucks that day to make unloading easier. However, a security camera footage from a storage unit near the company revealed the truck swap was carefully planned. That Monday evening, Thomas drove to Greg Miller's house in Corning for their regular poker night. Arriving around 8:00 p.m., he used a company truck instead of his own car. Greg and his wife, Linda, hosted the weekly game where friends and neighbors played low-stakes poker until late. On the 28th of September, 2015, Thomas seemed fine during the game. But before 11:00 p.m., he asked Linda Miller to use her phone. This simple request would later prove to be important evidence. Around 10:50 p.m., Thomas called Michael from Linda's phone. This call initiated the murder plot. At the time, Michael was at home, arguing with his partner. After the call, around 11:30 p.m., Michael left home on his bicycle. He rode to ServPro, where he retrieved the maroon truck Thomas had left for him. Next, Michael picked up Mark Blanford. Blanford later stated he didn't know about the murder plot and thought he was just watching out for a break-in. The maroon truck arrived back at the company parking lot at 12:55 a.m. On September 29, 2015, surveillance footage showed someone leaving the parking lot on a bicycle a few minutes later, presumably Michael returning home. Back at the Clayton home, Kelly was with her 2 young children. She had no idea about the terrible events that were about to happen. Around midnight, Michael used a key Thomas had given him to enter the house through the garage. He was wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask. Charlie later said the mask looked like one her father wore when hunting. Kelly was asleep in her bedroom when Michael broke into her house and went upstairs. He attacked her in the master bedroom, hitting her twice with the handle of a fiberglass maul. The attack woke Kelly, but she fought back and tried to escape. She ran from the bedroom towards her daughter's room down the hall. While trying to get away, Kelly fell down the stairs, hitting the wall at the bottom. She then ran through the dining room into the kitchen, but Michael caught her and continued hitting her with the maul handle. He brutally beat her head and face until she died from her injuries. On September 29, 2015. Sometime after 12:30 m-. Thomas came home from a poker game and found his wife, Kelly, dead in the kitchen. He said she was lying in a pool of blood. The scene suggested a violent struggle that started in the bedroom, continued down the hallway and stairs, and ended in the kitchen, where Kelly died. Thomas called 911, appearing shocked and upset while reporting his wife's death. However, investigators quickly became suspicious. They felt his behavior and description of the scene seemed insincere. Police officers arriving at the scene found a very bloody crime scene. According to Deputy Dean Swan, Deputy Swan's body camera recorded the shocking aftermath, which he described as almost unbelievable. Evidence showed that Kelly had been beaten to death with great force, resulting in severe head and facial injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was missing from the house. This eliminated robbery as a motive, suggesting the attack was personal and intended only to kill Kelly. Within hours of the murder, Kelly's family members arrived at the scene. Her sister, Kim Bourgeois, and her mother, Elizabeth, were at the house within an hour of the police's arrival. Kim later described the horror of that moment. Her mother and her were wailing. She was throwing up on the side of the road. She can't even explain to you that feeling. The most devastating part of this crime was that Kelly's 7-year-old daughter, Charlie, saw much of it. When police questioned her, Charlie, being so young, first said the person who broke in was a robber. However, her detailed story was very important in solving the case. Charlie told investigators that a man came in and hit her mommy with something like a pipe. She thought her mommy was dead when she saw her on the ground. Charlie also remembered that during the attack, her mother told her to run away, showing that Kelly was trying to protect her daughter even as she was dying. Sheriff Jim Allard felt a chill when Charlie, asked how she knew the intruder was male, replied, "Because his eyes looked just like Daddy's." This statement made Thomas a suspect in his wife's murder, despite his apparent alibi. In a later interview at the Chemung County Child Advocacy Center, Charlie gave more details about the intruder. She described him as wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask similar to one her father wore hunting. When asked to clarify how the intruder resembled her father, Charlie specified his mask and jeans, confirming she had seen her father wear similar items. As investigators began to piece together what had happened, they immediately focused on Thomas as a potential suspect. While his alibi appeared solid, he had been at the poker game with multiple witnesses who could corroborate his presence. Something about the situation didn't add up. The investigation changed significantly when Linda Miller, Greg's wife who was at the poker game, informed the police that Thomas had asked to use her cell phone about 90 minutes before Kelly's body was found. This detail became important when investigators learned that Thomas had called Michael Beard using Linda's phone. Phone records showed that Thomas and Michael had been in frequent contact in the days before the murder. This was strange because Michael no longer worked for Thomas. This increased communication, along with Michael's recent firing and money problems, pointed to a possible murder-for-hire scheme. When police questioned Michael Beard, he initially confessed to killing Kelly Clayton. He stated that Thomas hired him to murder Kelly and burn down the house to collect insurance money. Michael described the murder plot discussions. Starting in April 2015, Thomas allegedly offered him $10,000 for a job that could lead to jail time. Without specifying what it was, Michael joked about killing Thomas's wife for that amount, and Thomas smiled but didn't elaborate. The plan allegedly became firm after Michael was fired from ServPro on September 17, 2015. Michael said Thomas picked him up that day and asked how he would earn income and pay rent. Michael, who lived in Thomas's apartment, claimed Thomas offered him 5 months of free rent, plus the $10,000 to kill Kelly. However, in a stunning turn of events, Michael later recanted his confession before the trial. He changed his story completely, claiming that Thomas had only hired him to burn down the house for insurance money, and that when he arrived at the Clayton home, he found Kelly already dead. According to this new version of events, Michael panicked upon seeing the body and fled without setting the fire, which explained why the house was never burned. After confessing initially, Michael showed the police where he had discarded important evidence after the murder. This included the murder weapon, hidden in a wooded area, blood-stained clothes he wore during the attack, and keys to the Clayton home that Thomas had given him to enter the house. The bloody clothes were found in a swamp about 40 feet from an inn in Elmira. Thomas had previously asked about surveillance cameras at that same inn. DNA tests confirmed that the blood on the clothing was Michael's, providing undeniable proof that he was involved in the murder. Even though Michael later denied his involvement, investigators had strong physical evidence connecting him to the crime. Crucially, Michael's DNA was found on the fiberglass handle of the maul, which was the murder weapon used to kill Kelly. Meanwhile, the case against Thomas Clayton was built largely on circumstantial evidence, but it was overwhelming in its scope and detail. Surveillance footage from the storage facility next to ServPro showed the carefully orchestrated vehicle exchange that allowed Michael to use Thomas's truck to travel to and from the murder scene. GPS data from the company trucks provided a detailed timeline of movements on the night of the murder. The data showed Thomas driving a green ServPro truck that left the company at 6:10 p.m. and arrived at the Clayton home at 7:25 p.m. The truck left the Clayton home at 7:37 p.m. and arrived in Corning 14 minutes later for the poker game. More crucially, the GPS data picked up again on the 29th of September, 2015, when Thomas turned on the truck at 12:22 a.m. and showed the vehicle arriving back at the Clayton home at 12:35 a.m. The time when he allegedly discovered Kelly's body and called 911. The investigation showed that Thomas wanted Kelly dead for two main reasons: money and personal desires. He had secretly doubled her life insurance. Also, he was having affairs and wanted to end his marriage without losing money in a divorce. During the trial, 3 women testified that they had relationships with Thomas while he was married. One of these women was only 15 years old when the affair occurred. The prosecution argued that Thomas wanted to be free from his marriage and collect Kelly's life insurance. Therefore, he found it easier to hire someone to kill her than to get a divorce. His relationships with other women proved he was unhappy in his marriage, but didn't want to deal with the financial consequences of a divorce. Michael Beard and Thomas Clayton were tried separately for first-degree murder. Michael's trial occurred first, in late 2016. Although he retracted his confession, the jury convicted him based on the strong physical evidence. Michael Beard was sentenced to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder in November 2016. He was sentenced to life in prison in February 2017. Beard is serving his sentence at Auburn State Prison. Clayton's trial began in early 2017 and lasted several weeks. In February 2017, after 6 weeks of proceedings and 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Thomas Clayton guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced in April 2017 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing, Clayton insisted on his innocence, stating he had absolutely nothing to do with the murder of Kelly. Clayton is incarcerated at Sing Sing State Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. Mark Blanford, 53, pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter. Blanford began serving his sentence in April 2017 and was released on parole in late August 2020 from the Cayuga Correctional Facility in Moravia. According to the State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, the most tragic aspect of this case was its impact on Kelly's children. In a heartbreaking letter read at Thomas's sentencing, Charlie wrote, "I love my mom. I love my dad. But my dad is a coward because he made Michael Beard kill my mommy." Custody of the children was given to Kelly's sister, Kim Bourgeois, who has worked tirelessly to provide them with a loving home. The murder of Kelly Stage Clayton has left a deep wound in the quiet community of Caton, New York, which prides itself on its reputation as a small town. The death of Kelly, a devoted mother and vibrant woman, is not only a devastating blow to her family, but also a sobering reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. Thomas Clayton, driven by financial intrigue and personal grievance, hired Michael Beard to carry out the brutal crime, taking the life of the wife he had promised to love and protect. Charlie's innocent yet haunting testimony became the key to bringing the truth to light, proving that justice can be served even in the most heartbreaking circumstances. Although Thomas and Michael were sentenced to life in prison, nothing could ease the pain of Charlie and Cullen, who had lost their beloved mother. Thanks to the loving care of Kim Bourgeois, Kelly's children are now in a new home. But this story reminds us of the value of honesty, family unity, and the importance of facing conflict with honesty rather than violence.